Order number 1, administration of oath. Order number 2, communication from the chair. Order number 3, messages.
No.
Order number 4, petitions.
Just a minute. Honourable members, standing order number 225, subsection 2, paragraph B requires that the Speaker report to the House any petition other than those presented through a member. I therefore wish to convey to the House that my office has received a petition from Mrs. Jerry Saoli Olekina and Mr. Justus K. Mugo on behalf of members of the Union of Kenya Civil Servants regarding the payment and harmonization of hardship allowances for public servants. The petitioners contend that public service policy stipulates that public servants working in hardship areas are entitled to hardship allowances and that the government has been discriminative in paying the same hardship allowances. The petitioners contend the following: that 1, the Judicial Service Commission and the Teacher Service Commission, together with other state organs, receive hardship allowances in more areas than other offices under the Public Service Commission. And 2, there is urgent need to appreciate and recognize the marginal differences of hardship in arid and semi-arid areas in terms of award of proportionate hardship allowances. Honourable members, the petitioners therefore pray that the National Assembly 1, conducts investigations into the circumstances under which there are disparities and or discrimination in payment of hardship allowances for public servants. 2, causes the government to gazette the classification of current arid and semi-arid areas and cause the Public Service Commission to honor the 2012 gazetted list of hardship areas. 3, recommends that Salaries and Remuneration Commission should harmonize and standardize the rate of allowances for arid and semi-arid areas. And 4, recommends that the Salaries and Remuneration Commission should harmonize payment of hardship allowances for public servants. Honourable members, this petition therefore stands committed to the Departmental Committee on Administration and National Security for consideration. I wish to inform the House that a similar petition has already been presented in the House by the member for the Ragwa constituency, the Honorable Jeremiah Kioni, MP. I therefore direct that the committee consolidates and considers the 2 petitions and reports its findings to the House and the petitioners in accordance with Standing Order number 227-2. Honourable members, I also wish to inform the House that following the retirement of Mr. J.N. Mwangi, former Senior Deputy Clerk in the National Assembly, the Parliamentary Service Commission did advertise and interview candidates to fill the position of Senior Deputy Clerk in the National Assembly. The interviews were conducted a month ago, and the successful candidate who was duly appointed to that position is Ms. Sarah Kyoko, who has been the Director, Legal and Procedural Services in the Senate. Ms. Kyoko is an old officer having joined parliamentary service in 1994. and has tremendous experience in the work that is done in the National Assembly and Parliament as a whole. I therefore request honourable members to extend to Ms. Sarah Kyoko the necessary cooperation, as you always do, to other members of staff, and more particularly in a new capacity as the Senior Deputy Clerk, National Assembly. I thank you, honourable members. Leader of Majority.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also welcome Sarah Kyoko, who has been around this parliament for over 25 years, who served 20 years during the time when we had only the National Assembly, and then went to the Senate, spent there 5 years, and now we welcome her back home, the National Assembly. And I pray that she is baptized, and be aware that the volume of work that goes through this house cannot be compared to what goes through the Senate. So welcome, and please be prepared that you will have, you leave the office late in the hours. You will, because you are basically in charge of legislation. And I'm sure under you and Njoroge as director in charge of that department, we will do better than before. So welcome.
Well, indeed, it's just to mention that, again, following those interviews, Mr. Samuel Njoroge was appointed substantively to the position of the Director, Legislative and Legal Services in the National Assembly. Honorable Barire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also want to add my voice to that of the Leader of Majority in congratulating Ms. Sarah Kyoko, who I have known for the longest since I joined this house over 17 years ago. And I know you have what it takes, but let me say this, Mr. Speaker, that it is refreshing to see that we now have a very senior woman in this house, and in the Parliamentary Service Commission. We are very, very happy. After Mrs. Munga left, we wondered if we'll ever get another woman at that level. So I'm really glad, and I'm sure so are all the women MPs, that we have a woman at that level, and we are glad that the Commission found it fit to put a woman who obviously meets the merit. Thank you.
Jared Ongera.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. Mr. Speaker, may I also join my colleagues in congratulating Parliamentary Service Commission for appointing Sarah Kyoko as our Senior Deputy Clerk. Mr. Speaker, sir, I know Sarah Kyoko as a capable woman and a very trustworthy officer. She served us very well when I sat in the other lower house in the Senate, and I'm very happy. And I'm very happy, Mr. Speaker, that Sarah has been brought to this house. Sarah is a woman who puts all her energy to the work that she does. And I know that having chosen a very senior woman like this, we want to congratulate you, Sarah, and we know that you are equal to the task. We ask you to be fair in the dispensation of your work to all members in this house. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Honorable Tandi.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. I also would like to join my colleagues in congratulating Sarah and to also welcoming her to this house. But, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to, if you allow me to make a comment on the petition on hardship allowances, which has come through this house. Mr. Speaker, the question of hardship allowance is very serious, and I wanted to request the committee to conduct a complete overhaul of the question of hardship allowance in Kenya within the public service. Because, Mr. Speaker, recently our committee, the Committee on Finance, was through the Commission on Revenue Allocation, going through the question of equalization fund. And, Mr. Speaker, if you look at the report, you find that we have the Commission has reviewed the manner in which the equalization fund is going to apply to capture sub-locations and areas as opposed to counties as was before. And Mr. Speaker, this is a very good report which this committee can use to review the question of hardship allowances. You realize, Mr. Speaker, that there are some regions like where I come from, Alego Songa, which is not considered as a hardship area for purposes of allocating hardship allowances for public servants. Yet, Mr. Speaker, there are certain sections that really should be considered. So, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to plead with the committee that is going to look at this report, this petition, to go overboard and look at the whole hardship allowance question in totality, so that we can have this matter settled. Because otherwise, Mr. Speaker, in future, we'll still have many members petitioning the House to consider certain areas which may have not been looked at. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Ole Sangok.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. And may I take this opportunity to congratulate Sarah Kyoko for being appointed. And thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. And I wish to congratulate also the Parliamentary Service Commission for making sure that we have women in leadership position in this House. Honorable Speaker, I would also like to note that there are a commendable number of employees of this National Assembly, together with the Senate, with disabilities. And that is a good step in our attainment of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. People like Chemungeno, who are on wheelchairs, are also working and serving in this National Assembly. Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker, for those positions that have been awarded to persons with disability, and also congratulate again Sarah Kyoko for that new position. As you have been informed by the leader of the majority, His Excellency Adan Ndwale, that the job here is a bit bulkier than more than the Senate. So you will have to up your game and make sure that you work around the clock to make sure that members are comfortable. I also wish to call upon the members to make sure that they accord Sarah Kyoko the necessary assistance that she may require in her new duties. Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker.
Member for Makueni.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me an opportunity to also congratulate Sarah Kyoko. Mr. Speaker, I also want to say that this is an encouragement to other members of staff. And I also want to say that our members of staff employed by the Parliamentary Service Commission are very professional, Mr. Speaker. They are working very hard. Reports are coming in good time. So her promotion should be an encouragement to other members of staff to work hard, and I believe she's destined to higher places. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Now, honourable members, you know we have a new system where members have to ask questions. But member for Mwea.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I also take this opportunity to congratulate Sarah Kyoko. I wasn't there 20 years ago. I hope to be there 20 years to come. But what we have heard about her is enough to tell us that we are in safe hands. Mr. Speaker, allow me to also join hands with the Speaker, Mr. Tandi, Honorable Tandi, in commenting about this issue about hardship allowance, Mr. Speaker, and urge that we need to take this issue seriously so that we review the areas that are recognized as hardship allowance. I come from an area, Mwea constituency, that has some parts, Mr. Speaker, that may be classified as more than hardship by the definition that I have seen. These areas border our county, Embu, in Bere, that is under hardship allowance. And when we have teachers posted in some of these areas, we do suffer, Mr. Speaker, because they keep asking for transfers because they are in the same ecosystem, yet they are not considered as part of the hardship allowance. I do support Mr. Honorable Atandi in calling for a more serious review on our hardship areas, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Member for Endebess.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also want to join my colleagues to congratulate Sarah Kyoko for her new appointment. And Mr. Speaker, allow me to comment on the issue of the hardship allowance. Mr. Speaker, I happen to have worked in a hardship area, that is in Baringo. And there is a lot of disparities when it comes to hardship allowance to the public service and also hardship allowance to those who are in the judiciary and other agencies. Mr. Speaker, I think it's a high time that the government harmonizes this. And my request to the Committee on Administration and National Security is to be able to visit some of these hardship allowance and see what is it that they are actually calling hardship. Because somebody working under those conditions, even traveling to the area of work, nowadays with the border, maybe it is easier, but during that time, it was very difficult. Mr. Speaker, apparently, even in the classification of hardship areas, I think in Honorable Kioni's petition, it's a question of how do we even revise it, because there are places in this country where if you post somebody to go and work, they would not want to go and work there. For instance, in my constituency of Endebess, there are areas where when people are posted, they look for transfers to go and work in other areas. And yet these are places that have not been classified as hardship allowance. And in the last parliament, we had approached the Committee on Education to be able to revise and see that these people are considered and they are being able to be assisted. So thank you, Mr. Speaker. I support the petition.
Finally, member for Kangundo.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for giving the opportunity to join my fellow colleagues in the issue of MS Sarah Kyoko. First, I appreciate the work of PSC for nominating her. Also, I congratulate her. Mr. Speaker, the PSC is the backbone of what we do in this house. The image of this house determined by our clerks, how they present the materials in written form. So I welcome her and tell her that Article 9.6 was for Senate. Now she should work full in Article 9.5 of the National Assembly. Thank you.
Fellow honour members, perhaps we may not need to proceed so much on that, but just to, of course, alert the Committee on Administration and National Security that, yes, it is true that the petition makes some specific prayers, but of course, in coaching our report, we must be alive to the provisions of Article 249, Clause 2, Paragraph B, that the Chapter 15 commissions.
For giving me this opportunity. This is a petition regarding coal mining in Mwingi sub-county. I, the undersigned, on behalf of the residents of Mwingi East sub-county of Kitui County within the Republic of Kenya, draw the attention of the House to the following. That the petitioners have lived in Mwingi East sub-county of Kitui area since time immemorial, majority of whom are peasant farmers who grow maize, beans, sorghum, millet, green grams, among other crops, and also keep domestic animals. That in the year 2008, coal mining was discovered in the area, occasioning the government through the then provincial administration and the local leaders to arrive at a decision to relocate residents from the said area to allow coal mining. That on the 27th of April 2018, via Gazette Notice number 389, the Cabinet Secretary for Mining gave a public notice on the application for mineral rights without following due process of law, in particular without any civic education, public participation, and involvement of the people. That the community has never given consent for the mining in accordance with the provisions of Section 37(1) of the Mining Act, with regards to the procedure for mining on private or community land. That similarly, the governor of the county government of Kitui announced that mining activities would start in the next 6 months with effect from April 2018, and that the local residents would be relocated to Kanyonyo area in Kitui County, about 100 kilometers from their current residence. that the residents have buried their loved ones in the said area, and it will be against the Kampa customs and cultural practices to unearth their loved ones and see their graves being destroyed by heavy machines. That school-going children and the elderly and the disabled will be negatively affected due to change of environment as a result of relocation. That the land was not properly surveyed, with many people possessing titles with errors in names, and while others have less size than the actual parcel of land allocated. That during demarcation process, large parcels of land were left between the boundaries and allocated to strangers who have no legal right over it. That environmental impact assessment or environmental management plan were never conducted. The community has never been informed about compensation of their land and the properties in the area. That efforts to resolve this matter with the relevant stakeholders have been futile, and that the issues in respect of which this petition is made are not pending before any court of law, constitutional or legal body. Therefore, your humble petitioners pray that the National Assembly, through the Departmental Committee on Energy, considers the matters raised in the petition pursuant to the provisions of Standing Order 216(5)A and make recommendations thereof. And your petitioners will ever pray. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, the first petition is referred to the Committee on Administration and National Security, and yours is referred to the, as you have prayed, to the Departmental Committee on Energy. Let's move. Next order.
Order number 5, papers.
Leader of the majority party, is it the majority whip? Very well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was consulting with the Honorable Nyoro. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Leader of Majority Party, I beg to lay the following papers on the table of the House today, Wednesday, October 3rd, 2018, afternoon sitting. 1, the report of the Auditor General and financial statements of the Central Bank of Kenya for the year ended 30th June 2018 and the certificates therein. 2, the reports of Auditor General and financial statements in respect of the following institutions for the year ended 30th June 2017 and the certificates therein. A, Kenya Airports Authority, and B, Regional Center for Mapping of Resources for Development. Report number 3, Mr. Speaker, is reports of the Auditor General and financial statements in respect of the following constituencies for the year ended 30th June 2017 and the certificates therein. A, Kipkelion East Constituency, B, Samburu East Constituency, C, Sigor Constituency, D, Tetu Constituency, and E, which is the last one, Tiati Constituency. Report number 4, Mr. Speaker, is annual reports and financial statements in respect of the following institutions for the year ended 30th June 2017. A, Kirinyaga University, B, University of Eldoret, C, the Kenya Accountants and Secretaries National Examination Board, in brackets KASNEP, and D, Kenyatta National Hospital. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Kathuri Murungi.
Honorable Speaker, I beg to raise the following paper on the table of the House today, Wednesday, 3rd October 2018. The report of the Special Funds Accounts Committee on audited financial statements for the National Government Constituencies Development Fund for the 17 constituencies in Nairobi City County for the financial years 2013, 2014, 2014-2015, and 2015-2016. And for the clarity of the members who come from Nairobi County, the constituencies are as follows: Dagoretti North constituency, Dagoretti South constituency, Embakasi Central constituency, Embakasi East constituency, Embakasi North constituency, Embakasi South constituency, Embakasi West constituency, Kamukunji constituency, Kasarani constituency, Kibura constituency, Rangata constituency, Makandara constituency, Madare constituency, Roysambu constituency, Ruaraka constituency, Stale constituency, and Westerns constituency. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
I think, honourable members, I think it is important that members from Nairobi County, for the first time, that's a report from the Special Funds and Accounts Committee. And I think we need to commend Honorable Kaduri and his team. He seems to be having difficulties carrying the report. I think it's heavy. Vice Chair, Health Committee.
Thank you, Speaker, sir. Before I read my paper, I congratulate on behalf of the Health Committee, Ms. Kyoko, to be appointed as the Senior Deputy Clerk of our Assembly. Thank you, sir. Honorable Speaker, I beg to lay the following papers on the table of the House today, Wednesday, October 3rd, 2018. Reports of the Departmental Committee on Health on the number 1, Joint East African Community Heads of the State Retreat on Infrastructure, Health, Financing and Development held on 21st to 22nd February 2018 in Kampala, Uganda. Number 2, Third Annual UHC Financing Forum held on 19th to 20th April 2018 in Washington, D.C., USA, and the International Convention on Public Health, Cuba Salute Conference held on 23rd to 27th April 2018 in Havana, Cuba. Number 3, 12th Stop Cervical, Breast and Prostate Cancers in Africa, SCCA Conference held on 22nd to 25th July 2018 in Maseru, Lesotho. Number 4, 71st session of the World Health Assembly held on the 21st to 26th May 2018 in Geneva, Switzerland. And number 5, 22nd International AIDS Conference held on 23rd to 27th July 2018 in Amsterdam, Kingdom of Netherlands. Thank you, sir.
Very well. Next order.
Order number 6, notices of motion.
Honorable Kaduri.
Honorable Speaker, I beg to give notice of the following motion, that this House adopts the second report of the Special Funds Accounts Committee on audited financial statements for the National Government Constituencies Development Fund for constituencies in Nairobi City County for the financial years 2013-14, 2014-15, and 2015-16, laid on the table of the House today, Wednesday, October 3rd, 2018. Thank you.
Very well. Next order.
Order number 7, questions and statements.
Honourable members, question time. Member for Teso South constituency, Honourable Geoffrey Omuse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. I have a question number 15 of 2018 to the Cabinet Secretary for Energy. Could the Cabinet Secretary outline the implementation status report of the last mile connectivity program in Teso South constituency? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. to be responded to before the Departmental Committee on Energy. Second question, member for Homa Bay Town, Honorable Peter Opondo Kaluma. Honorable Kaluma. Very well. Member not being present, not desiring not to be present. Question is dropped. Next, member for Nambale constituency, the Honorable Sakwa Bunyasi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I join everybody else in congratulating the appointment of Ms. Kyoko to her new senior position. Mr. Speaker, sir, I wish to pose the following question to the Cabinet Secretary for Water and Irrigation. Could the Cabinet Secretary provide the implementation status of the irrigation project located along the Sio River at Malanga and Mwikema villages in Nambale constituency, and list the number of affected owners who are yet to be compensated, and state when the compensation would be concluded? Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Very well. To be replied to before the Departmental Committee on Agriculture and Livestock. Next question, nominated member Godfrey Osotsi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to present the question. Question number 18 of 2018. Could the Cabinet Secretary, A, provide the total proceeds of sports lottery and taxes collected under Section 12 of the Sports Act 2013 during the financial year 2017-2018, and B, the total amount paid into the National Sports Fund during the same period and the projected levies for the current financial year 2018-2019. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, to be responded to before the Departmental Committee on Finance and National Planning. Next, member for Likoni constituency. Honorable Mishiboko has informed that she is not able to attend and has requested for deferment of the question, which I've acceded to. So we move to member for Nyaribari Masaba constituency. Member for Nyaribari Masaba constituency, the Honorable Ezekiel Ombaki. Member absent, not desiring to be present. Question is dropped. Honourable members, I have this communication to make. This communication relates to nomination of persons for appointment as commissioners to the National Cohesion and Integration Commission. Honourable members, my office is in receipt of a letter from the Ministry of Interior and Coordination of National Government in the Office of the President, notifying that the term of the office of the chairperson and commissioners of the National Cohesion and Integration Commission lapsed. The letter conveys that the term of office of the commissioners came to an end on the 12th day of August 2018 in accordance with Section 19 of the National Cohesion and Integration Act number 12 of 2008. Honourable members, Section 17 of the National Cohesion and Integration Act 2008 establishes the National Cohesion and Integration Commission. Under Section 19 of the Act, a commissioner is appointed for a 3-year term, which is renewable once. Pursuant to Section 17, Subsection 1, Paragraph B of the first schedule to the National Cohesion and Integration Act, this House duly recommended persons who are appointed by His Excellency the President as NCIC commissioners on the 12th of August 2014. The President subsequently extended their term for a further 1 year. Honourable members, that Section 17, subsection 1, paragraph B of the said act now requires this House to recommend persons for appointment departure. It's that the Committee on National Cohesion and Equal Opportunity will this time consider the applications and not the Departmental Committee on Justice and Legal Affairs, as was the case in 2014. This departure is informed by the understanding that the process leading to the appointment of commissioners under Section 17(1)B of the Act is essentially a recruitment process and not the ordinary approval process of nominees contemplated under Standing Order number 216 clause 5, paragraph F on the mandate of departmental committees. In addition, under the current Standing Order number 212C, the Committee on National Cohesion and Equal Opportunity is the relevant committee of the House charged with the mandate of considering matters related to national cohesion. Indeed, in the old dispensation of the standing orders, the same committee was a joint committee of both houses. Consequently, it could not have handled the recruitment which the law places under the exclusive jurisdiction of the National Assembly. Given the then prevailing circumstances, the relevant committee of the House at the time was the Departmental Committee on Justice and Legal Affairs, which is not the case today. In summary, honorable members, I wish to guide the committee and the House as follows. 1, that the clerk of the National Assembly is directed to immediately commence the requisite administrative process necessary to actualize the recruitment of the commission. 2, that the names of persons who shall have made their applications at the expiry of the statutory period shall stand committed to the Committee on National Cohesion and Equal Opportunity for shortlisting, interviewing, ranking, and recommending the suitable candidates to be nominated by the House as contemplated under the said Section 17(1)B of the said Act. 3, that in addition to the provisions of the National Cohesion and Integration Act relating to consideration of the applications, the committee shall also be guided by the provisions of the Public Appointments Parliamentary Approval Act of 2012 with the necessary modifications, particularly with regard to the requirements on notification of shortlisted applicants and the general public of the time and place for holding the interviews. And 4, that the House shall nominate 15 persons for submission to the President, from whom he shall appoint commissioners of the National Cohesion and Integration Commission. The House is accordingly guided. I thank you now, members. Sorry, other members, I am told there was one more question by the member for Chepalungu. Is the member for Chepalungu in the House? Member for Chepalungu, the Honorable, Gideon Koske. The Honorable Gideon Koske, member for Chepalungu. Member being absent, not desiring to be present, question is dropped. Next order.
Order number 8, the Supplementary Appropriation number 2 Bill, National Assembly Bill number 23 of 2018, first reading. A bill for an act of parliament to authorize the issue of certain sums of money out of the consolidated fund and the application towards the service of the year ending on 30th June 2019, and to appropriate those sums for certain public services and for connected purposes. Order number 9, the Health Laws Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 14 of 2018, second reading.
Order members, if we could just clear this, if we could just take your seats and we clear this, it's a small motion. Member for Mwingi, I'm not able to tell whether you are standing or sitting. And I hope the House and the member for Mwingi Central, is it? Mwingi Central, when he was presenting his petition, he said that the residents of Mui location have been in that place since time immemorial. The latest divination that I came across in my mind as to what is time immemorial is as follows. Time immemorial is time whence the memory of man runneth not to the contrary. So I suppose the memory of a member of Mwingi does not run contrary to what he is saying. Honourable members, debate on this bill was concluded yesterday, and what remained was the question to be put, which I hereby do. That the Health Laws Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 14 of 2018, be now read a second time. Will as many as that opinion say aye? Aye. As many as the contrary opinion say no. The ayes have it.
A bill for an act of parliament to make amendments to the health-related laws.
Next order.
Order number 10, the Urban Areas and Cities Amendment Bill, Senate Bill number 4 of 2017, second reading.
Leader of the majority.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the urban areas and cities amendment bill, Senate Bill number 4 of 2017, be now read a second time. Speaker, by way of introduction, the Urban Areas and Cities Amendment Bill, Senate Bill number 4 of 2017, was read for the first time in the House on 19th of April 2018. Mr. Speaker, this bill proposes to amend the Urban Areas and Cities Act of 2011, which was passed by the 10th Parliament, and for the sole reason being that it was to review the criteria provided for classifying areas as cities, municipality, town, and market centers. So before you call an area an urban, before you call it a city, a municipality, a town, or a market center, the classification was provided for in that Act of 2011. And now what the Senate is trying to do, Mr. Speaker, is that there's a need that a review is necessary since the criteria as provided in the Act of 2011 have not been achieved by the county governments under the prevailing circumstance unless this law is amended. So in other words, the county government under devolution have met some resistance, have met some headwinds in the implementation of this law, Mr. Speaker. So the Senate, in its wisdom and as a custodian of county governments, felt that we need to do some amendments to that act. And the proposed amendments, Mr. Speaker, in the bill will, number one, enable county governments to efficiently and effectively deliver services in the areas designed as urban areas and cities. So, Mr. Speaker, that is the genesis of this amendment to the Urban and Cities Act of 2011. Speaker, now, if you allow me, I want to seek the highlights of the proposed amendments, and I'm sure members have a copy of the bill. If you look at clause 2 of the bill, it's just dealing with amendments to certain definitions which are in the Act. The bill is trying to define what is neighborhood association, what is the resident population, where the amendment defines the term city, county, to mean a county which is also a city under the act, like the Nairobi County. If you go to clause 3, Mr. Speaker, it proposes to amend section 3 of the Principal Act, and in order to ensure that implementing this act, the county governments must comply with the existing national urban development policy. So our counties cannot wake up one morning and decide to implement this law. They must be cognizant of the fact and the existence of the national urban development policy. Clause 4, Mr. Speaker, of the amendment seeks to make provisions for the delineation of boundaries of urban areas or cities, which again, that county governments can do that, but with a proviso that it must be initiated by the cabinet secretary or by the relevant cabinet, making a written, and they must make a written request to the cabinet secretary, and in the end, they do a formation of a committee where the chairperson must be the representative of IEBC as provided for in law. And then, of course, 3 representatives from the national government drawn from the ministry for the time being responsible for urban development, the Ministry of Environment. There must be 3 representatives from the county government, of course, again, drawn from the Department of Urban Development, Environment, and Agriculture, and then 2 representatives from the Institute of Surveyors of Kenya and Kenya Institute of Planners. So a body, a committee that is chaired by a person from IEBC will look at when you want to implement this law. Speaker, clause 5 and 6 of the proposed amendments seeks to review the eligibility for granting of a town or a city status as having the capacity to effectively and efficiently deliver its services to its residents. So if there's a need to upgrade or to grant a town or a city that status, the services provided for in the first schedule must be fulfilled. Clause 7 of the bill, Mr. Speaker, makes provisions for the eligibility of the grant of the status of a market, which includes having a resident population of at least 2,000 residents. These are areas, if the colleagues find we want to amend and disagree with the Senate, then we will have to go to what we call in the standing orders mediation process. Speaker, these days, and I'm sure members of parliament from the rural areas, these days you'll find markets coming up every 2 kilometers. And you know, when they build markets without due consultation, then they will ask, the people will ask you to put a school, a dispensary, water. So this law is trying to make sure that before you put up a center or a market center, there must be minimum 2,000 people living there, so that you don't create small chiefdoms of people who are related in one way or the other. And this is very common, Mr. Speaker, in the pastoralist areas. We sometimes tend to favor our clans and create too many markets. And these markets then will make the little resources, either CDF, national government, or the county government, to be overstretched. Clause 9, Mr. Speaker, seeks to make the amendments to Section 13 of the Principal Act in order to ensure that the members of the board of a city are appointed by the county governor as opposed to the county executive committee. And this again is to give the governor some leeway, some powers. Clause 16 of the bill, Speaker, seeks to amend Section 29 of the Principal Act, and this is found at the back pages of the bill, in order to ensure that a city or a municipality manager is appointed by the County Public Service Board as opposed to the Public Service Commission. And Mr. Speaker, I am sure our county assemblies listening to us and watching, before they make any legislation, they must be cognizant of the national legislation that this House passes, so that this law is going to be the guiding principle on the types or the kind of legislation that the our county assemblies will implement. So, Mr. Speaker, Clause 17 provides for the qualification of the appointment of a city or municipal manager. Clause 18 of the bill seeks to amend Section 31 of the Principal Act and seeks to ensure that the management of a town is vested in a town committee as opposed to the administrator. So, Mr. Speaker, if you look again at this bill from the Senate, it seeks or proposes to amend the first schedule of the Principal Act in order to reduce the number of residents population required for a city from 5,000 to 2,000, from 500,000 to 250,000. That is debatable, Mr. Speaker, because a city, you want a city to have 250,000, we must define what a city is then. Because the current act stipulates that for you to enjoy city status, the minimum population figure should be 500,000. But the Senate, in their wisdom, they have reduced that to 250,000. While that of the market, for you to establish a market, the requirement is to have at least a population of 2,000 residents who are present. So, Mr. Speaker, as I conclude, permit me to observe that this bill is certainly one of the most important bills in our country coming from the Senate. And with it comes a framework for regulating our urban areas, for regulating our cities in this country. So, Mr. Speaker, it's a very important bill. I am sure if we do further amendments, if we disagree with the Senate, I want to inform members that we will end up with a mediation process. And mediation process is not a crime. It's provided for in the Senate. It's part of the perfection, it's part of consensus building between the two houses on legislation. With those many remarks, I move and call upon the Honorable Chair of Transport, Honorable Proceedings, to second.
Honorable Proceedings.
Thank you, Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to second, and I also thank our Leader of Majority for extending that honor to me. Speaker, I want to agree with our Leader of Majority that this bill from Senate is attempting to do a very important thing, which is, Speaker, to create structures in our cities. Mr. Speaker, as we talk today, or as we sit today, there is nothing like Nairobi City, Mombasa City, Kisumu City, or take even towns, Eldoret Town, or whichever town you want to call or touch, Mr. Speaker. Because, or why am I saying that? It's because that when the new constitution came in and created wards, then our cities are divided into wards, small units called wards. And therefore, what the Principal Act then did was to attempt to consolidate and make those cities to become cities that we knew before, Honorable Speaker. And therefore, it's a very important bill. Because then, without cities and without towns and without markets or municipalities, then we have a problem that our country will very soon degenerate in terms of living standards, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, this is the reason why then this bill, and I'm urging honorable members that we support this proposal from Senate. Of course, Speaker, we will of course show one that we are working together, but above all, Mr. Speaker, that we want to create these structures so that at least when we go home, we have our own cities and our own towns. And therefore, it is coming up with criteria. And allow me to summarize some of the criteria that we noticed. Of course, Speaker, my committee had opportunity to do public participation, and I will come into that in a short while, and we have submitted our report, or table our report, which honorable members must have got an opportunity to look. But therefore, in doing that, Speaker, which I want us to support, or I'm pleading with the House to support, Speaker, it is saying that a city will have a population of above 250,000. As Honorable Duale said, maybe that's debatable and members can debate, but that is the wisdom of our honorable members. And my view maybe is because that you will see a number of cities, and this will make our cities, Speaker, not 3, but 5 in this country, if you are to look at the bill, Honorable Speaker. So that will be a city, if you were to look at it from population perspective. Number 2, municipalities. We used to hear municipalities in the last constitution and last parliament, Speaker, but this bill is then proposing and saying that let us reduce from 250 population to a minimum of 50. Speaker, it can also be 250,000, but the minimum will be 50 for a municipality. When you proceed, Speaker, to a town, so what will be a town? A town will be a place or a town that will have a minimum population of 10,000. It can go until maybe around 49,000. That will be a town. This is a very important bill, Speaker, because I am very certain all honorable members here listening and willing to contribute have something called a town, a municipality, or that. And this is very critical. And I'm appealing to honorable members that we really contribute to this, because this is our home. This is where most of our voters stay. So that is a municipality, 50,000. A town will have 10,000. And market, Honorable Speaker, will have a minimum of 2,000 people. So that is how our towns, our markets, our cities is proposed to be structured according to Senate, if we agree with them, which I will really seek this House to agree with them. So number 1 is to create those towns and give that criteria. Secondly, this bill, this amendment bill, Mr. Speaker, is also creating structures. And it's attempting to answer the question, then who manages those structures and institutions that have been created? Honorable Speaker, it has been proposed that in a city, it is managed by a city management board. And this is under clause 9 of the bill, Honorable Speaker. Municipalities who are going to manage them, they are going to manage through a municipal board, which, as Leader of Majority said, the bill also went on to provide for a criteria on how to be able to create those boards. It is very important, Honorable Speaker, to say to honorable members, it will be very good for us to go through this bill very carefully, so that when governors are, because they have been given powers, establish these institutions, so that when governors are doing that, you or we honorable members are aware, and we can be able to participate. So in towns, Mr. Speaker, Honorable Speaker, they are going to be managed by town committees. Honorable members, you will see this under or in clause 17 of the bill. And then, of course, markets are going to be also managed by market committees. You will also see this, honorable members, Honorable Speaker, in clause 10. That is what this bill, ideally or in summary, Honorable Speaker, is attempting to do. So what happened with our committee? When we got this bill as provided for in standing orders, this is what we did, Honorable Speaker, and it will be good for honorable members then to also follow with us. That, Honorable Speaker, my committee considered the Urban Areas and Cities Amendment Bill 2017, Senate Bill number 4 of 2017, in our sitting that we held on 14th, Honorable Speaker, August 2018, and 5th September 2018. Pursuant, Honorable Speaker, to standing orders number 127, paragraph 3A, the committee invited the public through the Daily Nation and Standard newspaper on Friday, 13th July 2018, as provided for, Honorable Speaker, in our Constitution. Honorable Speaker, this gives me an opportunity to share with you And this is something critical that we need to think as a country for both houses. If the bill, Honorable Speaker, originated from Senate, as it is in this one, and then they have done public participation, why would we go on, Honorable Speaker, as National Assembly doing public participation? It is a repetitive thing, in my view, and maybe that calls for us to really think, because that will mean wasting of taxpayers' money, calling for people, and in fact, you will see, even when we call these people in our committee, Honorable Speaker, they came and agreed with us in the recommendation of Senate, meaning that it became like superfluous thing to do public participation, while the other house had already done public participation, Speaker. But this is a debate. This people can debate, or honorable members can debate, but it's in my view that we need to agree as a house, both houses, that if the bill originates from Senate and they have done public participation as required by law, why would we want to repeat the same thing and do public participation? Does that mean that we don't agree with them, or does that mean that we don't trust them? I think this is something that, Speaker, can be debated. However, because of the legal structures which are available, that is making us or giving us power to do public participation, my committee did, Honorable Speaker. And in so doing, as I said, through the advertisement in those papers on 13 July 2018, the committee received memoranda from, among others, Honorable Speaker, Central Organization of Hawkers Association of Kenya, Kenya Herbal Research Integration Association, the Institute for Social Accountability, the Council of Governors, and also the ministry itself, Honorable Speaker. And also they appeared before us, and we had discussion. However, Speaker, as I said earlier, most of these people who made memoranda, who appeared before my committee, my honorable committee, agreed with most of the proposals, Honorable Speaker. Except that when we retreated, we also looked at their proposals, and we thought as committee, we actually realized that, Honorable Speaker, there might be some few gaps. And those gaps, Speaker, we are proposing to this Honorable House, and then we can also decide whether you will agree with us. And what did we discover, Honorable Speaker? We discovered, and I'll give an example, we discovered that this child is almost born. These institutions are almost being created. That is, the cities, the municipalities, the towns, and the markets. But what might have been forgotten, Honorable Speaker, is how will this kid be fed? Or there's no breast milk for this kid to be able to grow. Even God, Honorable Speaker, knew very well that the child growing in the womb must grow simultaneously with the milk in the breast, so that by the time the child is born, then the child will have already ready milk to be able to grow or to eat. What happened in this bill, Honorable Speaker, in our observation as a committee, we realized that this child that we are almost giving birth, and I mean these cities we are almost giving birth or forming, have nowhere to grow. They have no resources. They have no money. So what happens? My committee, therefore, Speaker, is proposing that we are proposing further amendments or amendments, Honorable Speaker. Although this will come in the committee of the whole House, I would really want to share with honorable members, because this is very important that we discuss at this level, so that we can enrich even those amendments that we are proposing. Because if we leave it at where the Senate left, I'm very certain, Honorable Speaker, these cities will create, they will have offices, but they will not have resources, Speaker, to grow, to become cities that we admire or that we want to live in. And therefore, Speaker, this is a very important proposal from ourselves as committee, and I hope the House will agree with us that Senate forgot the breast milk of the child. So let's give this child some milk, honorable members. So what are we proposing? Honorable Speaker, my committee then went forward to propose an amendment. And we are saying, Honorable Speaker, that Section 49 of the Principal Act is amended by inserting the following new section immediately after Section 49. What is it, Honorable Speaker? This is it, that they established a fund to be known as the National Urban Development Fund. In this fund, Honorable Speaker, the fund shall be applied for the purposes of improving the enabling environment for sustainable and inclusive urban development and to enhance infrastructural services delivery in urban areas, including the following, Honorable Speaker:
And our committee was informed, Honorable Speaker, with the true fact that these cities require serious resource to be able to develop. For example, if it is sewerage system, if it is water, if it is any program that requires to be done for human survival, the money we give counties, Honorable Speaker, will not be sufficient to be able to do this. So we will create very, very beautiful institutions. But the money we give to counties, I have realized it is less than 40% or 30% that goes to development. And I'll give an example, for example, Speaker of my county, West Pokot. Kapenguria town, which will be municipality in this proposal, if it is approved, Speaker, doesn't have water. And for water to be available, or that we construct water to Kapenguria municipality, Honorable Speaker, it requires 10 billion. The money that goes to county of West Pokot is about 4-5 billion. So what does that mean? It means that we will close the county budget for three years. So is that realistic? It will not be realistic, Honorable Speaker. And that is why I'm saying that this child, which Senate is creating, they didn't provide the milk, the breast milk for the child. And that is why this House is requested to, my committee is requesting this House to create the milk. And therefore, Speaker, what will this fund do? It will do, among other things, the following. Number one, Honorable Speaker, or Roman 1, and for members, if you are following, this you will get in our report from page 8 of our committee report. We've really done a very good research and consultation, Honorable Speaker. So, number one, this fund, urban and metropolitan infrastructure upgrading, informal settlement, urban regeneration, and other human settlement services, Honorable Speaker. And even as we talk, even in Nairobi, when there was rain, this long rain that just passed, Nairobi city itself, Nairobi County could not be able to manage the regeneration of Nairobi until the president himself then brought in the national government team to be able to help Nairobi to grow. So without this fund, Honorable Speaker, these institutions will just be institutions without any development. Number two, Honorable Speaker, we are proposing this fund to do what? To do high priority capital expenditure projects in urban areas, including stormwater, solid waste management, and urban planning and development. 3, development and maintenance of National Urban Observatory. 4, providing county government with capacity development, support, and urban planning, management, and development of urban areas. 5, urban disaster risk mitigation, Honorable Speaker, and human settlement safety, including urban resilience of climate change and urban integrated programs, Honorable Speaker. 6, research, documentation, and dissemination of information on state of urbanization in this country. 7, management and administration of towns and municipalities that cut across 2 counties. And 8, Honorable Speaker, any other purpose that would enhance the development, promotion of urban development programs that may be determined by Director of Urban Development and Management in this country. Honorable Speaker, the fund shall complement donor funding for urban development. And very important, Speaker, the fund shall be used to provide for conditional grants to the county government, and also counter funding. Sometimes, Honorable Speaker, and I had an opportunity to attend a World Bank conference recently, 3 months ago, Honorable Speaker. Donors might be willing to come and help counties, but then they will ask counties, we want counter funding from yourself, so that we can give you, if we are giving you 90%, we want 10% from yourself to do a certain capital project. Honorable Speaker, with the money we are giving counties, it will not be sufficient. And that is why we are proposing that we create this fund at national level, so that if a county, for example, Trans Nzoia County, or Homa Bay County, Honorable Speaker, get a donor, and that donor gives them conditions that the national government with the county of Homa Bay can be able to rescue that Homa Bay county in developing that particular town using this fund, Honorable Speaker. And we will really have a very happy people, Honorable Speaker. So where will the fund come from? If you, Honorable Members and Honorable Speaker,
we have provided for you the source of funding that we are providing, or we are suggesting that we create an urban fund. And that, Honorable Speaker, is in page 9 of our report. And among other, Speaker, if you allow me, I'll say about 2 of them. And I'm saying that the source of the fund shall be, A, such monies as may be appropriated by the National Assembly for the purposes of urban development. Or, Honorable Speaker, B, any funds provided by bilateral or multilateral donors for the purposes of the fund. C, gifts, grants, donations, or endowments as may be given to the fund, Honorable Speaker. And D, monies borrowed by the National Treasury. This is very critical, Honorable Speaker, in providing that service to our people. And we have given you, Honorable Speaker, and Honorable Members, we have given you a lot of notes that if we do that, Honorable Speaker, then there's a reason to create then municipalities and these cities that has been proposed by Senate. Without doing that, Honorable Speaker, we will have a problem that we will have cities without resources. We will have cities without support. So it will be as good as in a paper. And when it is in paper, it will gather dust. And when it gathers dust, we will not have done anything, Honorable Speaker. So I hope we will raise to that occasion that the House and members and you, Honorable Speaker, agree with my committee that we create this fund to help our counties. And Honorable Speaker, everybody here comes from county. Everybody here owns a county or comes from a county and born in a county. And we'll go back to those counties. We better listen and rise to the occasion and help them, Honorable Speaker. That is one gap that we found in that bill from the Senate. Second gap, Honorable Speaker, as I conclude, we also realize that we ask ourselves the question, if we are creating city management boards, municipal boards, town committees, and market committees, we need to give a time frame, Honorable Speaker. Because if you look at the original bill, this original bill created those institutions. But up to now, nothing has happened. So my committee has gone forward to propose an amendment, which will bring it up, Honorable Speaker, at the Committee of the Whole House, and it is in our report, that this is not forever. That the governors has been given the powers to establish those institutions. But it will not be forever, Honorable Speaker. We have given 2 years, between 2 years and 3 years maximum, in this report, although we will propose, Honorable Speaker, in the Committee of the Whole House. We have said, Honorable Speaker, it will not be forever. We have given a maximum of 3 years. Governors who are listening us then today, that if the President signs this bill into law, and before that the House agree with the amendments from my committee, and this goes through, that governors will have only 3 years to establish those institutions. So it will not be business as usual. Because we're asking ourselves, if we create this, if we go by the Senate only without adding, then what's going to happen? Governors might sit. Governors might wait forever. Governors might say, it doesn't fit my political determination or thinking. So he can also leave this bill, Honorable Speaker, to gather dust at the shelf. And we said it's not going to work like that. We are proposing a maximum of 3 years. So that after the President signs the bill into law, the governors have only 3 years to establish those institutions. Without which, Honorable Speaker, we have given a condition. And which, if the Honorable House agree with us, and finally also Senate, we have said, if, for example, Homa Bay Town is a municipality or a city, and the governor will not establish the management of Homa Bay Town or any other town within 3 years, the management of that town, Honorable Speaker, returns back to national government. So this is a condition, so that they know that it's not forever. They know they will not sit on it, Honorable Speaker, or they will not take their easy time or sweet time. They know that, Honorable Speaker, there is a responsibility upon them given by the people of Kenya through this Honorable House. And therefore, those are 2, Honorable Speaker, gaps that we realized or that we established through our deliberations as a committee and also through that public participation, Honorable Speaker. And if we do that, Honorable Speaker, in my view, as I conclude, then we'll have achieved two main gaps that was forgotten. Number one, we'll have created the breast milk for the child, and therefore the cities will grow well. Number two, we will have also given timeline to governors so that they don't take their sweet time and take it forever. Because the creation of these towns, Honorable Speaker, is not for the benefit of a governor. It is for the benefit of the people of Kenya and the residents of those counties. And therefore, it is not going to be sweet time. We have given them 3 years. And if they don't establish those institutions within 3 years, Honorable Speaker, what happens, as I said, it will return to national government.
So it's up to themselves, Honorable Speaker. As I conclude, let me plead with honorable members in this House that we agree with Senate. And take this opportunity to Speaker and say to our sister House or our brother House, Senate, that as we do process some of these bills quickly as we have done today, Honorable Speaker, as National Assembly, that they should also reciprocate the same. There are a number of bills, Honorable Speaker, from this House, from National Assembly, which are in Senate, and they are not moving. We don't know what is happening there. There are so many. One of them is my bill, Honorable Speaker, which is a roads bill. We concluded long time ago, and it is gathering maybe dust in Senate. So what is happening? Look at this one, the urban cities, the Urban Centers and Cities Act. It just came the other day. And this Honorable House will be concluding, hopefully maybe in the next 1 week, and it's ready. So, Speaker, I think this, we are urging you, Honorable Speaker, that you also sit with your colleague in Senate, because most of our bills are gathering dust in Senate. They should also do the same thing. They should reciprocate, Honorable Speaker, so that at least we can move as a country. Because, like, for example, my bill, which is in Senate, which is supposed to show us the way forward in terms of roads. Critically, we have to divide the roads into ourselves, national government and county government. Up to now, it is we don't know what's going on. Number two, divide resources between national government roads and county roads. Up to now, we don't know what's happening. I think, Honorable Speaker, I want to take this opportunity as a chair of that Honorable Committee to urge them that let them reciprocate. Let us not have this sibling rivalry. We don't have high house or upper house and small house and so on. The people of Kenya will not eat that debate. The people of Kenya want the services to be done. So I'm asking them, Honorable Speaker, that they should reciprocate. What we are doing, they should also do, Honorable Speaker. So with those very, very many of your remarks, depending on how one sees it, I want to thank you, Honorable Speaker, and I beg to second.
Other members, member for Kikuyu. I propose the question, which is that the Urban Areas and Cities Amendment Bill, Senate Bill number 4 of 2017, be now read a second time. Now, members, if I follow Honour members, let me recognize the presence in the public gallery of pupils from the following institutions: Changozi Primary School, Masinga Constituency, Machakos County; Musoni Primary School, Kibwezi East Constituency, Makueni County. They are welcome to observe the proceedings in the House this afternoon. Honorable Gekaria, what's your point of order?
Honorable Speaker, I know in this House we have passed some motion that this kind of motion, every member gets 10 minutes. And I know this is a house of debate, but this one has a lot of interest, Honorable Speaker. I was asking just before we start deliberations and debate on this, if we could agree as members and each member to have around 5 minutes. I know we have already passed this in the past. That would give us an opportunity for us to be able to air our views regarding this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is that the feeling of the House? The House, this kind of request can be made if you look at standing order number 97, at the commencement, which is around, which is this time, before actual debate commences. So is that the mood of the House? Honourable members, I don't seem to hear sufficient voice. This is a kind of issue that the Speaker can easily determine through voice vote. There's no threshold required for this one. So, honourable members, can I put it to question? Yes. Very well. The question is that in the debate on the motion listed as order number 10, debate by every other member contributing be limited to 5 minutes. Will as many as other opinion say aye? Will as many as a contrary opinion say no? The ayes have it. I can tell the decibels which are higher. So, well, honourable members, the reason, of course, has been explained by the Honourable Gekaria, is apparently there may be a lot of interest because I believe every member comes from some marketplace, village, and something about urban. I hope every one of us has actually looked at the Urban Areas and Cities Act, and more particularly those requirements for categorizations, because I really would want to hear members address that issue of those quantums that were given in that act when it was first passed by the 10th Parliament. So I give this first shot to the member for Alego Usonga. Absent, not desiring to be present. Next on the list is the member for Kitui Central.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I've read this bill, and I want to support the amendments as presented by the Senate and the further amendments as proposed by the committee. But even as I do that, Mr. Speaker, I think it is important we appreciate that even though this act was passed by this House in the 10th Parliament, a number of implementation challenges have been faced, and that's why the reason why the Senate decided to make these current amendments, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the main objective of these amendments is to be able to review the criteria of establishing the urban areas. And Mr. Speaker, as you said, as you rightly put it, we all represent areas which are actually urban. For example, Kitui Central, which I do represent, Mr. Speaker, is the host of the county headquarters, which is Kitui Town. And Mr. Speaker, the town currently, in the former arrangement, it used to be a municipal council. But with now the new arrangement, it has been tricky to say where it belongs. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, I'm a bit happy with the proposal which is coming up in terms of ensuring that the required criteria in terms of population figures is clearly stated, Mr. Speaker. But even before I comment on the figures, Mr. Speaker, one of the issues which is coming out strongly in this amendment, and which I really support, is the idea of having area development plans. Because, Mr. Speaker, the more we visit our constituencies and the more we go around, you realize that in terms of planning for these towns, these markets, these cities and these urban centers, Mr. Speaker, planning has become a very major challenge. And actually, most of them, there's nothing you can call planning, town planning. So when I see the idea of really enforcing that, even as they plan for these towns or these urban centers, Mr. Speaker, we talk about area development plan. That is very important, Mr. Speaker. The other thing, Mr. Speaker, which is important, and which I think we need to support as our House, is the idea of the requirement that even before the governors, Mr. Speaker, categorize these urban centers, these urban areas, as markets, towns, or cities, and there will be need to consult the CS in charge of that particular area. Because, Mr. Speaker, I think that consultation is important. Otherwise, the way some of us Kenyans do our things, Mr. Speaker, when we are given the chance to do them without consultation, we at times get out of control. And it is important that there is that discussion between the national government and the county government, even as we agree on this classification. Mr. Speaker, the issue of the population figures, 250,000 for cities, at least 50,000 for municipalities, 10,000 for towns, and 2,000 for markets. These figures, Mr. Speaker, are reasonable. Otherwise, the earlier figures were making some of these areas to be, you could actually achieve any city other than the 3 we have. Now, with this new classification, Mr. Speaker, we are likely to get a number of other municipalities now joining the class of the cities, which will be good for this country, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I think these figures are reasonable, and it's important that we support them so that even, for example, when I look at my own town, Kitui town, Mr. Speaker, it's now a municipality. And the figure of 50,000 plus, I think if we really seriously look at that, we might not be able to achieve that. But the fact that now it's a county headquarters, and the new amendment bill proposed by the committee that any town which is hosting a county headquarters, Mr. Speaker, to be classified as a municipality, then to some extent will be qualifying. So to me, I think now the figures are a bit reasonable, but the earlier figures were very high to be achieved. Mr. Speaker, the other thing which is important, Mr. Speaker, is the issue of the proposed fund, Mr. Speaker. Some of these towns to be developed require a lot of money or a lot of resources. For example, Mr. Speaker, Kitui town, as we are talking now, has no sewer line. There's no sewer line. And this is very critical to a town which is developing. So, Mr. Speaker, it even discourages investors when they want to invest in a town where there is no sewer line. So when a fund like this is created, Mr. Speaker, it will help us in terms of developing things like sewer lines, things like low-cost housing for the people who live in the cities. But the last important thing I want to say, Mr. Speaker, because I can see my time is running short, is the issue of capacity building, Mr. Speaker. The people who are managing this board, Ole Sankok. Members, we have reduced the speaking time to 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to contribute to this very important motion. And from the onset, Honorable Speaker, the Urban Areas and Cities Amendment Bill is timely. And I would like to thank the Senate for coming up with such a bill. For us, what will benefit Kenyans, we will always endeavor to support. Honorable Speaker, our population in this country is continuously increasing. And as we increase our population, manyatas and villages will be turned into towns. Honorable Speaker, and the more we turn a bigger chunk of our landmass into some small kind of towns, cities and villages, Honorable Speaker, the more the farming areas shrink. In developed countries, cities and urban areas are controlled so that majority of the population can now live in urban centers and leave some larger chunk of land for farming. Honorable Speaker, if I give you a scenario that we are in now, if you subdivide central Kenya to each individual that is born in central Kenya, Honorable Speaker, each person may only benefit with a quarter of an acre. With a quarter of an acre, you will only have a space for a house, a space for a small boma for mbuzi, and a toilet. And that is the end of that shamba. If then the whole country become like that, Honorable Speaker, we risk running shortage of food because of a lack of agricultural areas and agricultural land, farming land. Honorable Speaker, I can also give an example of uncontrolled urban areas or cities. For instance, the town I come from by the name Narok was planned by the then paramount chief, those traditional chiefs. And since it was the white settlers who needed somewhere to put a town, then from their own little knowledge, decided that because they don't want these white settlers to encroach into the grazing areas, then they decided to give them a location that is on a ditch that is prone to floods so that they can be washed away before they encroach into grazing areas. It's unfortunate now that it is the same resident of Narok who are suffering from the effect of floods because of what in form of that poor planning of those traditional paramount chief, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, the government, as we speak, is using a lot of money to purchase land, sometimes land for development of social amenities. You go to some of these towns, they are poorly planned. You cannot have somewhere or land for development of schools, for development of hospitals, for development of any social amenity. Honorable Speaker, it becomes very difficult for the government to plan. And that is why you are seeing, even in large cities, our largest city, the capital city of Kenya, Nairobi, buildings being brought down because they have encroached on road reserve, they have encroached on riparian areas. It is simply boiled down to poor planning. And this bill, Honorable Speaker, will come and control in terms of categorization of a town to be referred as a city or a municipality or a simple town or a market place, Honorable Speaker. Because each categorization will attract a certain level of social amenities. And when investors come from abroad, they know their strength, economic or financial muscles, and that is why they will decide to invest either on a city or on a municipality or on a town. Now, when we refer to a small village market as a city, the investors may shy away from investing in our country because they will be turned away by that small market that we refer as a city. Honorable Speaker, they may even presume that all our cities are like that particular village that we may be calling a city simply because it is a county headquarter or something of the sort. Honorable Speaker, that is why I do strongly support the Urban Areas and Cities Amendment Bill 2017. And
Member for Seme.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I stand to support this amendment bill. I think it provides a clear process for delimiting the cities and towns. It provides a clear criteria for deciding and establishing urban areas and cities. It also gives the processes for establishing the structures. Mr. Speaker, I think this will solve the big problem we have had of poor planned urban areas where there are no proper roads, there are no proper sewage, there is no proper network and even lighting network. Mr. Speaker, I support this further because it does recognize the value of residents' associations, which are very important for participation in the establishment, the running of this. Mr. Speaker, it's also important that this bill recognizes the need to adhere to national policies. I think that will give uniformity across the country. Mr. Speaker, the guideline for setting the head of committee for the urban areas and cities, I support the idea that the permanent secretary is involved and the governor can also do the same by writing. And I support the composition, including professionals in the team and including the executives in the counties, particularly in planning, environment, and agriculture. And Mr. Speaker, I also support the fact that in terms of markets, this has been given to the governors so that we eliminate the whole long process. And then when we are looking at the structures of management, the establishments of the boards, it's actually important that criteria has been put down on how they are appointed and the qualifications that they require. And also the appointment of the secretary for the city boards, we are involving the public service board, while for at the lower level we are holding the county public service boards. And the appointment of the municipality boards, again by the governors, and approval by the county councils. Mr. Speaker, I see that a lot of thought has gone into this, and I particularly like the area of looking at markets, because, Mr. Speaker, markets are the precursors of the towns, and if they are not planned at the very beginning, they actually will create a lot of confusion in the future. To that extent, I actually support that. The issue of the appointment of funds, it is automatic that when you're bringing a new structure like this, there's need to fund the process. Without funding the process, it will just be talk. Mr. Speaker, as I go towards the end, the issue of the schedules and the numbers in the schedules, I personally didn't see when I looked at the report and I looked at this, how we arrived at the numbers. We started with 500,000 for cities, then we went down to 250. It does appear to me, Mr. Speaker, that we just cut them by half. But I would have liked to see a more detailed criteria on how we reach that number, and also probably a more detailed criteria on how we are going to delimit the boundaries. As regards the services that are provided, I think this is extremely important, Mr. Speaker, that as we establish this, it must be clear at establishing that at every point there must be the services that can be provided that are available at every center. So with that, Mr. Speaker, it is, I do support this, but I'm sure, particularly in the area of numbers, that we will actually probably need to look at the numbers, even if it means that we go into mediation. But overall, Mr. Speaker, I do support this amendment bill. It will give direction in the establishments of cities, is the establishment of markets. If we don't do that, particularly with devolution, then all sorts of structures are going to crop up, and in the end, it will be very difficult to plan them. This is the time to do it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Shall we have Honorable Gekaria?
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for giving me this opportunity, and to thank the Senate. I want to echo the sentiments of the Chair of Transport, that it is true indeed that this is the first bill that has come from the Senate, and it is moving very fast. We are hoping that our brothers in the other house should also fast-track some of these very important bills that are before them. Of course, the Chair of Transport has alluded to the fact that the roads bill is still within their building, and they have not been able. My committee has two bills, the energy bill and the petroleum. Again, it has taken more than the required 90 days, and it is important for us to. But however, Mr. Speaker, first of all, I want not to agree with some of these amendments which have been proposed in these the Urban Areas and Cities Act. Honorable Speaker, it is the aspect of public participation is very critical in almost everything that in any legislation, be it at the national level, be it at the county level. I think public participation, it is something, and of course this House, we are going to also try and expound the meaning of public participation, so that public participation can be involved in almost every other aspect of legislation. One of the issues that has been indicated here is the delineation of the boundaries. Honorable Speaker, if you look at, they are just saying in the Act, if you want to expand or reduce the delineation that is in 4A, says delineation of boundaries of urban areas or cities may be initiated by the Cabinet Secretary or by the relevant county government making a written request. I think we should not leave the Cabinet Secretary to be able to do that. I think public participation is a critical component of this aspect, where, because getting a city and expanding your boundaries brings a lot of other issues, including business permits, which the fees are going to raise, rates, land rates. So we need to have the public participation in some of these things. And of course, again, Honorable Speaker, it is not right for us to give a Cabinet Secretary excessive powers. I think these powers we are giving to the Cabinet Secretary needs to be checked. I think when we bring in more players and stakeholders in determination, particularly on matters to do with boundaries, I think it is very important. Secondly, and most importantly, the aspect of boundaries. I want to believe that the constitutional office that is given that mandate is the IBC. As you try to expound the boundaries of a city or an urban area, then again you might end up affecting the boundaries, the administrative boundaries as indicated in our constitution. So again, we also need to look at, are we giving some team, a cabinet secretary or the county government, an opportunity for them to change our boundaries without, bringing on board. Of course, I've seen that one of the members of our board will be of course, a representative of IBC. Honorable Speaker, I think that is not acceptable, and we need to allow the independent institution, if they have been constitutionally been given that mandate, to be able to. I want to agree again with the Chair Transport regarding the time frame. Honorable Speaker, we have, I'm the one who moved the 5 minutes, now it is, anyway. Well, Honorable Speaker, the time frame. We formed, for example, these acts came into effect, I think, in sometimes back, almost 10 years ago, I think, quite a while. But you can see to date, Nakuru County has never formed a municipal board. And that time frame should be, the way we gave ourselves in the Constitution, time frames for a particular function, I think that is what needs to be done. The other aspect, Honorable Speaker, is about the governor being given an opportunity to appoint. I totally agree, but not competitively. I doubt how the governor will competitively appoint. I think that is the work of the...
Honorable Kalia, you clearly wanted others to have 5 minutes and yourself 10. I'm afraid the law will be equal to everyone. Honorable Ochanda, member for Bodo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One, I want to support this by virtue of having the bill look at new aspects that were missing, particularly the issue of the markets. Issues of the cities, municipalities, and stuff like that were really there in the old act. And as much as they might have not been very elaborate, they were there. But the issue of the markets are really new. While I recognize that, Mr. Speaker, there are a number of things that I want to say are still a problem. Those that are internally in terms of the amendments and those that are historical. In the amendments, Mr. Speaker, I want to look at what we have here as amendment in section 4 and amendment in section 5 and 6. There is a whole issue here of a cabinet secretary coming up with a team to do the delineation of urban areas. And that team is mandated or is allowed that can create an urban area that cuts across counties. That you can get an urban area, one single urban area, cutting more than one county. And when there's a problem, the problem is transferred to the county council of governors. I think there's a big anomaly here. That you create a problem as a minister, and then you transfer that problem to the council, to the council of governors. That's one anomaly that I see internally in terms of these changes that we are talking about here. The historical ones include the amendments, or the Senate has not looked at the land regimes that we have in the country in terms of the historical arrangements of the land tenure system. Before the new constitution, we had the tenure system that allowed for what were called trust lands. Under the trust lands, there are clear demarcations of what were called markets under the trusteeship of the county councils. All those things still exist in law. But now when this new law comes in, all those are not taken care of. I'm trying to say this in the sense that you'll get into a place that is clearly demarcated under what we call all trust lands as a market, but that market does not have or will not qualify to have 2,000 people. So meaning that we'll have a market under the demarcation of a public land, but when it comes to the Urban Areas and Cities Act, that kind of an area is not a market. So that kind of a contradiction I'm seeing that really needs to be sorted out by the amendment. Beyond that, there are areas that are not clearly public. We have a lot of what nowadays called makutanos. A lot of makutanos have developed into big towns. They are much bigger than the public lands that were initially demarcated for markets. So the makutanos, more of them are in private lands. So you look at the kind of what managing a private land in relation to managing a public land. When there were clearly markets, planning was easy, And there are things that you could do. There are roads that were clearly indicated that this is a provision for a road. But how do you do that in a private land that all of a sudden has ballooned in terms of numbers and now has 2,000 people that needs to be qualified as a market, or has more people that now qualifies as a town? I think these are some of the things that the Senate needed to have looked at and are ignored. And I want to believe that at the next level where we are trying to look at this, some of these amendments need to be brought out such that markets, we look at them also in relation to the traditional, the historical markets that we have known under the Trust Lands Act, which are now taken over as public lands, and they are still clearly demarcated as markets. Then there are new developments in terms of private areas like the Makutanos that have developed into towns, but they are private lands. So what that means is, when it's private land and you want to subject it to a public land arrangement in terms of physical infrastructure, there's bound to be problems. You cannot treat private lands as public when you are looking at the issues of sewer, you are looking at the issue of roads, and you are looking at all these kind of things. Because as a private land, you'll get that the roads were provided for like a 6-meter width. But as a public area, or now with the towns, you might require a bigger facility than that. Then I think there's a major problem in terms of these amendments, Mr. Speaker, sir. Thank you.
Honorable Koi Waluke, member for Silesia. Okay, very well. Honorable Iringo Kubai.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to contribute to this Urban Areas and Cities Amendment Bill, Senate Bill number 4 of 2017. Mr. Speaker, I support the Senate on this, Mr. Speaker, and more so I also support the chair of the committee which came up with the report by putting in the amendments, especially the amendment on the funding, Mr. Speaker, by amending Section 49, and also looking at the time frame, Mr. Speaker, because we cannot talk of a process which has got no time limit, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, I support those amendments, and more so the others which might come as we go on with this bill, especially in the committee of the whole House. Mr. Speaker, it is very necessary to reorganize our towns and cities and markets, and more so to classify them to the levels of their development and also the jurisdiction they serve, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as at today, you'll find that most of our towns which are currently in place, they have got a lot of, or most of the things are wanting. And more so, when it comes into terms of planning, we need to have controlled buildings, we need to have proper drainages, we need to have water and lighting, which are systematically placed, so that at least, Mr. Speaker, even infrastructure and the roads should be done in a way that they are accessible, Mr. Speaker. It's very often, Mr. Speaker, we hear of disasters like fire, which happen to come in our cities, and it becomes very impossible to put out these fires because even the fire engines have nowhere to pass through, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, it is important to do the planning. But my fear is, Mr. Speaker, despite that we will have a fund for the same, the current towns we have, most of them are put up in own land. Most of them are in areas where which people have already inhabited and are living there. It will be a bit tricky, Mr. Speaker, to develop this to the standards and the class of what this bill is trying to achieve. Mr. Speaker, my own reasoning, most of these towns, new towns, will be the ones which will really need to be critically put under this bill, and more so, we try to rectify the ones which are there as at now, to the extent that we will need even funds to compensate some of the people who are living there. Because you find in some urban small towns, like a small market, like in my place where we have our headquarters, Kangeta Market, you'll find that the commercial land which was demarcated many years ago is already fully built, and the people who have got their own pieces of land surrounding that environment, they are putting up commercial and also residential buildings in their own way, in their own farms. We will need to have that land, which is particularly owned by the county government, are acquired by the county government, to be put under this program, so that at least whatever we want to achieve, we can get it. But if we have to go to personal land, we will need also a fund to go the same way of compensating the others. Mr. Speaker, This will also make even taxation and the collection of rates easy, Mr. Speaker. You will find that in a certain shopping center or a town, those people who pay rates and dues to the county government, Mr. Speaker, they are less than half the buildings which are there because there's no documentation and people are put up the houses in any house, and therefore those ones which are already in the gazetted areas, they are only the areas where you can get people paying rates or rents, Mr. Speaker, and therefore the revenue there is lost. And therefore if we arrest this revenue, which will be coupled together with what the central government will give and the national government will give its share, I mean the county government, then it will be easy to develop these structures and more so actualize this one, Mr. Speaker. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I strongly believe that we need a time frame for the same so that we cannot do these things indefinitely. We need a time frame whereby each and every county will have done a bit of work so that at least we can achieve it uniformly in the country. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Wanyonyi Kevin.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for the opportunity. And I thought I should also make one or two remarks on the same. First and foremost, I think this bill is very, very timely.
Honorable, one member had an intervention and quickly removed as I started speaking. But that member may have known what I wanted to say. Anyway, Honorable Wanyonyi, please proceed.
Yeah, may I continue, but Mr. Speaker? First and foremost, Mr. Speaker, we should have some order. Currently, Mr. Speaker, with the population, increasing population, we see very many buildings coming up in urban areas, be they the so-called municipal areas and markets, and there's no plan. And therefore, this classification, I think, has come at the right time, so that there's order. Recently, Mr. Speaker, I went to a place I was almost 10 years ago, called Dubai. Dubai, when I was there 10 years ago, it was just a desert. I think we could just count places. I was there for about 2 months when I was working for a multinational company called Kodak. And I was there. And, you know, today you go there, you can't even find the place you are last because the town now is very well organized. So well organized that as I was there, the Speaker, CNN, this world news company, said Dubai is one of the most dynamic cities in the world today because there's a lot of planning. And therefore, there's a need for us to be able to have this possibly on population, and at the same time, as somebody mentioned, we should be able to put aside some areas so that some land is actually left for agricultural and industrial development. Today, you see people just putting up buildings left and side, and therefore you find it's very difficult to be able to get the services that are required. And therefore, there's a need, one, to plan for these urban areas based on population, and therefore the governors of those respective counties can competitively, therefore, choose the boards to be able to run these areas very effectively. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, we have also to take into consideration the social amenities that we go with this. In Tanzania, those days, there was this vijiji vya ujamaa, where the late president of Tanzania started, and so that they can be able to collectively have the social amenities coming together, be able to, for people can be able to enjoy in those facilities. Today, in my own constituency, I'm having a district headquarters coming up, but looking at it, I think we just have to demolish some areas because there's no plan for it. And therefore, the future of that particular town becomes really a problem. And therefore, I'm supporting this because I think it's the right thing from the Senate. The only question I'm having is to establish what's so-called urban development funds. What is the source of this money? The Kenyans today are already overburdened with with the taxation. I want, therefore, the committee to come up and explain to us where the money is going to come from. If it's just going to be from the rates and rents, let it be done so, and so we'll be able to maximize on the migration from the rural area to urban areas, the market coming up, municipalities and cities, and what have you. Lastly and not least, Mr. Speaker, I also want to say that today, as it is now, if we do not plan our cities today, tomorrow we'll be in a lot of problems. Look at our own area here, industrial area. Look at, for example, Kibera, look at industrial area where people stay. I mean, you can't even access your neighbor. And therefore, I support this, and I think we should be able to come up with a proper plan to be able to classify our urban areas as provided. Thank you.
Honorable Nyoro Didi, member for Keharo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I beg to support. And Mr. Speaker, as you know, urbanization across the world has been seen to bring about economic development, Mr. Speaker, because of course it brings about consolidation of resources, consolidation of factors of production, and especially labor, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, any legislation, Mr. Speaker, that comes into putting order into urbanization, Mr. Speaker, we have to support it and, of course, do our part to make it the best, even as we strive to have better urban areas, towns and cities, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, also, urbanization brings about ease when it comes to service delivery, because more people, the density of people consolidated in one place, Mr. Speaker, it brings about a lot of ease when it comes to provision of any kind of service by the government. Mr. Speaker, even as we talk about it, I have gone through the report and, of course, the bill, Mr. Speaker, the motion, and I have seen the creation or the proposed creation of National Urban Development Fund, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, because even as we debate this bill, I hope it is not one of the many that you always debate, and of course we pass, and then we take it to shelves, Mr. Speaker, only to gather dust. And I say so, Mr. Speaker, because there is a lot of correlation between this bill and something else, Mr. Speaker, that is called County Development Committee, Mr. Speaker, that was supposed to bring about all elected leaders in our counties insofar as development in our counties is concerned. But, Mr. Speaker, also, talking about that fund, I have seen a lot of work, of course, being allocated to that fund, Mr. Speaker, as a body. And one of it, Mr. Speaker, is, of course, the issue of infrastructure. I'm just wondering, in the practical scenario, as it is now, for example, giving an example of a city like Nairobi or any other. Mr. Speaker, of course, we have other entities and we have other levels of government and administration that is charged to doing the same, Mr. Speaker. Because I have seen also on the same creation of fund that there is also sources of fund for the same. Mr. Speaker, I think we need to align, even as we pass this bill, to align the work of each so that we don't duplicate. Because as things are now, even on devolution, Mr. Speaker, we already have layers of service delivery. For example, now, as we try to build our roads through Kera, we actually are not very much aware and sure of which are our roads and which are county roads, Mr. Speaker, and who should do what when it comes to infrastructural development, Mr. Speaker. And in my opinion, this fund, Mr. Speaker, should just be a kind of an arbiter and take up especially the towns that duplicate between several counties. Mr. Speaker, I am sure even where you come from, there are issues about a town that is contested between two counties. Once you go to a place like Keroka, some part of Keroka is in Kisii, the other one is in Nyamira. Probably those kind of towns, Mr. Speaker, can be arbitrated and can be managed by this kind of fund, Mr. Speaker. But in other normal scenarios, Mr. Speaker. For example, Muranga Town, where I come from, within Kiharu, I think this kind of fund should only do some kind of advisory without necessarily doing practical infrastructural development, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, I am sure even as my honorable member, Gekaria, moved about 5 minutes, because I believe there are so many interests in this kind of bill, Mr. Speaker, because basically all of us have got towns in our constituencies. Some of us live in towns, some in cities, some in manyatas, Mr. Speaker, even like my brother Sankok. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I am sure when we talk about markets, urban areas, and cities, it is just about minding about areas that carry high density of people. But Mr. Speaker, our towns are a far cry when it comes to planning, even comparatively to other towns, even in Africa, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Didi Nyoro, why are you shouting in a manner to suggest you had less minutes? You did not. You had exactly 5 minutes. Honorable Tuwei Kipkrui.
Next, Mr. Speaker.
Sorry?
I'll speak on the next foreign affairs.
Okay, very well, very well. Honorable Janet Ongera.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity so that I may also contribute to this very important motion. Mr. Speaker, let me from the onset congratulate the Senate for coming up with this bill. Mr. Speaker, this bill is long overdue and we should have implemented in the 10th Parliament, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is a very important bill and I want to support these amendments because of the following reasons. One, Mr. Speaker, I have noted that there is a clear definition on what is now a market, what is a municipality, what is a town, and what needs to be delineated. And Mr. Speaker, this is very important. Particularly myself, Mr. Speaker, who is the MP for Kisii County. Mr. Speaker, we have had great wars between the Kisii County government and the Nyamira County government because of the fight over the resources of Keroka market. And I'm very sure, Mr. Speaker, that for the very first time, if this bill is passed, these wars will come to an end because there's a clear definition as to what is now a market. The delineation and the delimitations of boundaries will be clearly set so that these issues, Mr. Speaker, can be rested once and for all. Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy also to see that the amendments give a clear definition of the terms that were defined in the principal bill. For example, Mr. Speaker, by deleting the definition of city-county and giving it a new definition. This is a great improvement from the principal bill, Mr. Speaker. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, I note that the amendments have now an enhanced professionalism. It further explains, Mr. Speaker, how the ad hoc committees, for example, will be appointed to manage the respective areas, and also, Mr. Speaker, the various professional associations that shall be included in the number of bodies. For example, Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy that the Institute of Surveyors of Kenya and the Kenya Institute of Planners has been included in the amendments. Mr. Speaker, also the delineation of boundaries of the urban areas, which I mentioned earlier, and the cities, creates very prudent management of these urban areas and centers. And even the distribution of resources, Mr. Speaker, will be now very clear in terms of resource allocations. There'll be proper planning. And Mr. Speaker, if we don't have this kind of bill, then we'll not have a proper and organized city that is well planned for. Mr. Speaker, that means that there will be no proper and faster development or acceleration of development in a city. Because if you have proper planning in terms of infrastructure, so that you know where is the drainage it will be placed, where shall you put the residential housing, then you'll have a jumble of a market. And Mr. Speaker, One of the areas I'll be very happy to see that this bill is enacted will be the proper delineation, for example, for Kisii County. If, for example, Kisii town becomes a city, it will lead to proper organization because it is right now, Mr. Speaker, that town is far from being called a city, if it was to become one, because you find that the boda here, Mama Mboga is here, there is no proper arrangement and definitions as to who should be able to carry out their businesses. We want these small enterprise businesses to be carried because they bring growth in any county. But unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, if they are not properly laid out, there is no laid out map as to where they should be situated, then there is chaos. Finally, Mr. Speaker, the amendment also gives a clear definition of the leadership composition and the appointment and roles of each of these leaders. And this is very important. Mr. Speaker, also, I want to conclude by saying that if this bill is passed by this Honorable House, it means that SGD number 6 and number 7, the one on clean water and sanitation, and affordable and clean energy, will be realities. And I'm very passionate, Mr. Speaker, on SDGs. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I want to support it, and I thank you for allowing me to speak.
Member for Mwea.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand to support this bill. And I do support it, Mr. Speaker, because by passing this bill, we will be spurring development in our country, in all our areas, and not just the cities that we do have. Mr. Speaker, the policies that we have in place currently do put a lot of focus on the existing cities. We do know that we have a Department of Housing and Urban Development, Mr. Speaker, that is carrying out development in various urban areas, but with a lot of concentration on the existing cities, Mr. Speaker. So by having this bill, we will see a number of other areas developing, Mr. Speaker, in terms of municipalities and in terms of cities, and overall we will register or record a greater development in our country. Mr. Speaker, I am particularly happy with the proposal by the committee to form the Urban Areas Fund. This fund, if well utilized, Mr. Speaker, will ensure resources are available to some of the areas that are currently underserved, Mr. Speaker. I have in mind my own and only town that may qualify to be under the urban area, the municipalities, Mr. Speaker, and that is Gurubani town, which is a host of a 7 billion economy, which is earmarked to rise to about 15 to 20 billion in the next 3 years. But if you go there, Mr. Speaker, despite the many people who are living there, the services that are there, we do not have not even a single road, tarmac road, going through town, Mr. Speaker, or even the sewerage or other services, not even a library, Mr. Speaker. And so I support this bill with the hope that when this fund is finally put in place, there will be fair distribution of resources so that some of these towns may also benefit, Mr. Speaker. I say so because I'm one person who have not been happy with the way resources are distributed in this country, Mr. Speaker. I've said it before, I'll say it again, that when I see myself going home with an equal CDF kit with constituencies that have only 3 wards compared to my 8 wards, with constituencies with under 50,000 people, with my 200,000 people in Mwea, Mr. Speaker, I feel that something should be done in the future so that when we create such funds, those funds are distributed equitably and can be seen to be fair in the distribution. Mr. Speaker, I also want to comment that as we congratulate the Senate for coming up with this bill, we want to urge them to be more proactive in acting on bills that come from this House, Mr. Speaker. I know, and I'm particularly interested with a bill that was passed in this House some months ago on irrigation. That bill is still sitting in Senate. We have not heard about it, and we hope that Senate can be more proactive, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, as I said, I am hoping that out of this bill, we will start seeing some more cities springing up, towns springing up, and as we do so, Mr. Speaker, we are hoping that the Department of Housing and Urban Development will be strengthened so that are capacitated to ensure that the coming up cities, coming up towns are well planned, that we do not see the kind of developments that we are currently witnessing, where people are making use of land currently under the hands of individuals coming up with developments that are not planned, Mr. Speaker. For that reason, Mr. Speaker, I stand to support this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Before getting to my left, Honorable Barida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity to support this important bill, which is timely and which is critical, especially as we face devolution and what devolution means to the people, especially at the grassroots level. Mr. Speaker, this particular bill is critical because for once now we are very clear about classification of an area, whether it is a city, a municipality, a town, or a market center. And more importantly, we are now recognizing the fact that we now have county governments, and therefore the bill goes further to stipulate and provide for the role of the county government in managing these towns, these markets, the municipalities, and even the cities. And even clearer is the fact that they are recognizing the county city, or is it the city, county city, which, like it's the case with Nairobi or Mombasa. So, Mr. Speaker, it is critical that the planning of these cities or these urban centers, where we know are growing at a very fast rate, especially with devolution. We are seeing more people now willing to stay closer to the counties, moving back to the counties, and as a result, the towns that we saw as small towns are now mushrooming into bigger towns because the population density is rising. And with it comes the challenges of inadequate infrastructure. Most of these towns don't even have, proper roads. They don't have water. They don't have sewer systems. And therefore, it is important that proper planning is done, and so that these towns can grow properly and they can be well organized to ensure that services are delivered in an efficient and effective manner. Mr. Speaker, of course, with this bill, it will become much easier, not just for the national government, but also for county governments to collect revenue, because as you go on, the revenue collection base will broaden, and it will be clearer who needs to pay revenue for what purpose. And out of that revenue, of course, is that the people, the citizenry, will expect services out of the revenue that is collected by the governments. And I think more importantly, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that for the first time, we are also recognizing the role of neighborhood associations. We know, like in the case of Nairobi, a lot of estates are really taken care of, security is taken care of, because neighborhood associations come together and make sure they collect money from the people who live there and take care of issues of garbage collection, issues of security, and therefore, it is important that we have this recognized in the Act so that these associations can be empowered to do even much more than they are doing. Mr. Speaker, more importantly also is the fact that we do have national urban plans that are not recognized by the county governments, and therefore it is important because this particular proposal is now saying or proposing that county governments must now adhere to the national urban planning policies that the national government comes up with, and they must comply with them so that we can have controlled and organized growth in urban centers and in the markets. But what I would want to see, Mr. Speaker, because the bill goes further to talk about the need to form ad hoc committees of key stakeholders, and it mentions the various sectors that need to be in that committee: environment, agriculture, Institute of Surveyors, Kenya Institute of Planners, is that we may want to involve the citizenry that will be affected by those urban centers, Mr. Speaker, so that their voices can also be heard, and we can have adequate public participation as we develop these cities and these towns and these markets, especially because of the impact it has on revenue collection, and also the issue of boundary, delineation of boundaries, so that we don't end up with conflicts. So with those few remarks.
Very well. Should we have Honorable Osotsi?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to contribute to this very important bill. Mr. Speaker, as you are aware, 60% of the world population is urban and is increasing by the day. And as we see in our various areas, we are seeing a lot of vibrancy in our markets, in our municipalities, as a result of the devolution process. But as we are seeing this, we need to see proper planning of these areas so that we reap maximum benefit. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a very important bill, but going through the bill, you realize that there are areas that require some improvements, as has been suggested by the chairperson of the committee. If I look at the criteria for the determination of a city, a municipality, a town, or an urban area, I think it's very limiting, because you cannot just say you rely on population and integrated urban area development plan as the only criteria for determining whether an area is a city or a municipality or a town. Because we know globally there are cities in the world which have less population and they are categorized as cities. For example, Mr. Speaker, the city of Geneva has a population of about 400,000, and 40% of this population stays outside Geneva, in France and other countries. But Geneva is one of the most popular cities in the world because of diplomacy and being a financial hub. So I think we need to relook at this so that we don't insist on population alone. Even globally, we have tech cities, we have smart cities. Here in Kenya, we have just approved money to go into the construction of Konza City, which is going to be a tech city. Konza City is unlikely to have 250,000 people in the next 10 years, and investors are waiting. So when we say a city must have 250,000 people, we are limiting. I think we need to look at the special features that go beyond just population. Mr. Speaker, this bill is also not talking about metropolitan areas. It is only limiting us to cities. We need also to talk about metropolitan areas like Nairobi, Kiambu, and Kajiado. That's a metropolitan area. How do we manage that? Where I come from, Vihiga County, the towns along the ways are developing very fast, and very soon they are going to be part of Kisumu Metropolitan. So this bill must be forward-looking. It must also talk about metropolitan areas. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, the bill refers to representative of IBC on those ad hoc committees. Mr. Speaker, we need a definition of a representative, because under our Constitution, Article 83, it limits members of the Commission from holding other public offices. So I think in the Committee of the whole House, we'll look at these issues. But most importantly, Mr. Speaker, talk about all these good proposals without money. Lastly, Mr. Speaker,
do that. And I think it is important for us to engage the stakeholders at that lower level to create partnership. And I think this bill may be able to help in some of those ways. And I think in a way, Nairobi, for example, is considered to be one city. One of the honorable members mentioned that it was a metropolis. But I think if this bill comes into force, we'll be able to create within that big city, we would be able to create municipalities, towns, and neighborhoods that can function and can provide the basic services, can deliver basic services, like, for example, dealing with street lighting, with roads, with sewage, problems that are now a way of unraveling the big county machinery that we have created, which is not able to meet many of the challenges of the complexities and the problems of inner city areas like Nairobi. And so I very much welcome it, and I support this bill. Thank you so much.
Shall we have now Honorable Lasso Ali, member for Saku?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support this very important bill. Mr. Speaker, this bill gives effect to Article 184 of our Constitution, particularly in the area of criteria for classifying, principles of governance and management of cities and towns, and also participation by the residents. Mr. Speaker, as we move towards a knowledge-based economy, I think this bill has come at the right time. Because if we look back in time, on our independence, if we were given the opportunity, Nairobi would not be what it is today. Mr. Speaker, at the heart of this bill is what we call spatial planning. Because without, I think, spatial planning, to have towns, markets, and urban centers coming up, then it will be very difficult to control as we see expansion of these centers day in, day out, and also mushrooming of the sort of low dwellings that we experience in our country. Mr. Speaker, with the spatial planning, I think a place like Salga today would be a big center because it provides a unique economic hub, but also it had lacked planning from the beginning, how it started, where there's a requirement for traffic planning, trailer parks. Also, as the town comes up, the population increases. Then what is put in that town is done in a planned and structured manner. Mr. Speaker, my own town of Marsabit was started in 1907. Just in the recent few months, the government kindly has put in about 2 billion to be able to come up with new infrastructure for water supply, sewage, and stormwater control. This has not been there before because you have a town that the population is almost spiraling, but there isn't the basic important amenities and infrastructure to support a growing population. Mr. Speaker, within this board, I think we are also seeing, within this bill, we are also seeing boards. Before now, I think individuals, whether at ministerial level or at the county level, have been appointing committees to run the towns and municipalities. I think the structured nature of how these boards will henceforth be employed or put to use, I think will allay many fears that funding and other things that will be put into these urban areas by the national government and also the county government and donors, monies are likely to be properly accounted for. Finally, Mr. Speaker, among the boards is urban development, agriculture, and environment. I think more often ecosystem is important, that particularly these three persons or individuals have been identified to be part of that board going forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Boni, member for Kitui Rural.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to contribute to this important bill. I rise to support this bill because it gives clear definition in the creation of the urban centers, cities, municipalities, and markets. You makes provision of social services very easy. Hospitals, schools, water, because people are close together. And the cost of providing these services becomes a bit very easier. The proposed establishment of National Urban Development Fund is actually a move in the right direction. Because most of our cities and towns, they don't have sewerage systems, waste disposal systems, even domestic water. And I tend to believe that this fund is going to cater for these systems so that people can get proper services, water, waste disposal, and also proper roads. In the management of the cities, the bill proposes committees to manage these cities. But I want to emphasize that we need capacity buildings for these committees so that they can actually understand how a city needs to look like, how a city should function. Otherwise, we are going to have cities which are not well managed. Proper planning for the cities is very important. And this bill is very important because LAPSET project proposes every 50 kilometers of the transfers to have a town. And this bill is really going to help us to have proper cities. There's also need to come up with a clear conflict resolution mechanisms. Because some of the towns we have, like Mutito Ande, even the Konza City, proposed Konza City, 2 or more counties tend to claim ownership of those cities, of those towns. So a clear mechanisms on conflict resolution needs to be established. With those few remarks, Chair, Mr. Speaker, I support.
Member for Kiabu, Namojomo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, lack of planning within our cities have been a source of headache. And I want to give an example. When the governor of Machakos had taken charge of some activities in Nairobi, and he wanted to beautify Nairobi, he went and collected some rocks from Mukambani and brought them along Uhuru Highway, and he said that is a minute. Because there was no planning of proper roads. There is only one small road that leads to Kiambu. And every developer is coming along Kiambu Road. He is either opening a bar or a showroom. And they are all opening into the main road because of lack of planning. That is why, Mr. Speaker, I would like to support this bill. So that when things are being done, when developments are being planned, there is proper planning within the city. Mr. Speaker, I want to also look at the issue of hawkers. We've been having hawkers in town. We have been having kiosks which are unplanned. But these have been in existence for over 10 years. Then one morning, they are all crushed. Our people become jobless. They don't have a business to do. We should have proper planning where markets should be established. Mr. Speaker, Honorable Songkok consumed about 2 of my minutes. Okay, 1. Really, if you could add 1 minute for me, because
You have 26 seconds because your 1 minute wasn't taken.
okay. So, Mr. Speaker, we should have proper planning so that our towns and municipalities are good. And when we establish municipalities, Mr. Speaker, we should not opening new conduits for corruption, new conduits for leakages of public funds. There should be systems put in place to ensure that public funds do not end up.
Very well. Honorable Koi Waruke, member for Sirisia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for giving me a chance also to speak. Mr. Speaker, this bill is long overdue, Mr. Speaker. But it's important, Mr. Speaker, that it has come from the Senate, because if you observe from 2010 up to today, Mr. Speaker, it is long overdue. Mr. Speaker, contributing about urban and cities, Mr. Speaker, this country need proper planning, Mr. Speaker. And with the population that they have suggested in the bill, Mr. Speaker, of about 10,000, 20,000 people, Mr. Speaker, I think that population is good. Mr. Speaker, the public participation in this bill, Mr. Speaker, must be observed very keenly, and it is very urgent that the participation of the public should be considered. Mr. Speaker, giving more powers to the CSs or cabinet secretaries, Mr. Speaker, to me, Mr. Speaker, I see that it is not very, very important to give much powers to the cabinet secretaries, Mr. Speaker, because some of these cabinet secretaries, Mr. Speaker, misuse the powers. Mr. Speaker, the very important thing, Mr. Speaker, which I'm observing, and us as a House should observe, Mr. Speaker, is, my question is that where will the money come from? Because this requires a lot of money, Mr. Speaker. Sometimes we give opportunities, Mr. Speaker, on, like now, the infrastructure has taken a lot of money, and many Kenyans think that maybe the money is stolen. But to me, Mr. Speaker, as I've gone around this country, Mr. Speaker, I've seen that the government, the Jubilee government, has done a lot of work in terms of infrastructure, Mr. Speaker, everywhere. And in infrastructure like roads, Mr. Speaker, tarmacking roads needs a lot of money, and that is where this government has spent a lot of money on good work, Mr. Speaker. So if we can get the money, Mr. Speaker, this bill is very good and it's very important to this country, Mr. Speaker. Other things that should be observed, Mr. Speaker, is the sewage, the sewer, Mr. Speaker. In many towns, Mr. Speaker, we have problems of sewerage, and it is important that this bill has come. It will rectify some of the problems that we are having in some towns or cities, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, many people in this country, Mr. Speaker, cannot differentiate the towns and cities and markets, Mr. Speaker. So the definitions of this bill, Mr. Speaker, will let our people know that this is a town, This is a city, and this is a market. Mr. Speaker, with those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I support the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Kimani Kuria.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I raise in support of this report on the consideration of Urban Areas and Cities Amendment Bill of 2017. Mr. Speaker, we cannot overemphasize the adage that failing to plan is planning to fail. And at last, Mr. Speaker, I'm seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, because we're going to define what our cities are, what our urban centers are, and what our towns are. I'm particularly impressed, Mr. Speaker, by clause 18B, section 60, that talks about inserting, that talk about amendment of the Principal Act by defining what these urban towns are. And Mr. Speaker, I'm highly impressed that all those towns that have a population of between 15,000 and 200,490 residents will now become facilities that we want in some of these areas. But why do we have to have people settle there?
To provide the county government, Mr. Speaker, with capacity development support in urban planning, management, and development of urban areas. That alone, Mr. Speaker, we have students who've completed Form 4. Some of them have gone to get trained for courses, but they can't find a place to get internship or to study. This is a perfect place where they can get hands-on experience in issues to do with management and urban planning. I'm impressed, Mr. Speaker, that this fund also will create what they call the Directorate of Urban Development and Management. It's a good concept in the sense that it will assist in the management of this town. What we have currently, Mr. Speaker, is an area which has an haphazard and clear mode of management and ways of running it. This will bring order, it will bring development, it will pump in money to devolution. This act will see money cascade all the way to the common person, which I welcome, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, also, if you look initially in the initial act, certain areas were left out. Even the issue of municipalities was critical. The two municipalities initially was Kisumu and Mombasa, which at the commencement of the original act were deemed as cities. And most of the benefits that is derived from municipality were not to benefit most of our towns. But pursuant to this amendment, Mr. Speaker, I would see, for example, a town like Kericho benefit. I'll see my town Litein benefit from these amendments. And a lot of benefits will accrue as a result of this amendment. Mr. Speaker, this is an idea whose time has come. Some cities, some counties, Mr. Speaker, did not even have town administrators because it was difficult for the governors to enact the original act. As you're speaking, more than 30 counties did not have the administrators in the respective areas. But with ease in which these amendments will bring in, it will make sure that the governors will move in speed to put in place these municipalities and towns, the boards, so that they'll be up and running and people can enjoy. On that, Mr. Speaker, I support. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Isiolo North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to speak to this proposed amendment. These amendments, which I support, Mr. Speaker, are timely. We do remember that the Principal Act, which the proposed amendments is intended to improve, was enacted way back in 2011, a year after promulgation of our new constitution. But I think after coming into force of the county governments in 2013, we realized that there are deficiencies in the original act. And especially, you realize that some of the county headquarters, if we go by the word qualification of what municipalities are, may not qualify
to be called to be municipalities. And therefore, I especially support the amendment which automatically makes all the county headquarters, irrespective of the size of population, to be municipalities. Again, Mr. Speaker, the proposed amendments have actually added new categories of urban qualified to be called towns because of small populations, and yet because they require services which are required in other towns and so on and so forth. And therefore, the aspect of adding market centers to the, what was in the original act is an aspect which actually appeals to us, especially those of us who come from the ASAL areas. You also, I also wish to state that we have had situations where market centers have been created haphazardly for political reasons, and especially in the rangelands, this has not been very good for us because it affects the health of rangelands, it affects the fragile ecosystems, and therefore, because the proposed amendments clearly outlines procedures which needs to be followed for creation of these different categories of urban centers from cities, municipalities, towns, and marketplaces, then the objectivity actually introduced by the proposed amendments will help us actually to rationalize the existing centers and make sure that the trading centers are not created haphazardly in the ASAL areas, and therefore it doesn't affect the management of our rangeland and so on and so forth. And again, you realize that if it comes to the capital city, which according to the Principal Act is supposed to actually be the seat of the national government as a capital city, as a city which also hosts foreign missions and so on and so forth, the amendment which is introduced through this the proposal, which actually encourages the city-county to work very closely with the national government when it comes to improving efficiency of particularly the transport network and other key infrastructure required in the city, is something which is so appealing to us. And I would like also to appreciate the proposals which are made, which is not in the amendments as it came from the Senate, but which has been proposed by the Committee on Transport, the introduction of a fund. You realize that most of the times we come up with legislations which sets up the structures, but these structures can only be helpful if they are resourced. And therefore, the suggestion that a fund be created to actually facilitate the structures created through this, the Principal Act and the amendments, be effective in terms of carrying out their mandate is again something which is very important and I support. And with those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I wish to support the amendments. Thank you.
Very well. The Honorable Member for Nyaribari Church.
Mr. Speaker, I wanted to speak on the motion of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Speaker. However, I want to support the amendment to the bill of the urban development because I think the timing is good, and we need to do that for purposes of ensuring that there is a conformity of the changes into our constitution and the changes therein in the country, Mr. Speaker, so that we don't duplicate efforts. Mr. Speaker, there has been in the past a movement of people from the rural setup to urban centers, but now with the devolved function with the county governments, Mr. Speaker, we have seen the formerly municipal councils being upgraded, now the headquarters of the counties, governments, and that has created an impact, a positive impact to our economy. However, Mr. Speaker, there are things we must address as a House. One such is the corruption, Mr. Speaker. When we were devolving functions, we might have forgotten and also devolved the corruption, Mr. Speaker. There has been rampant corruption at the county level. People who are employed within a very short time, Mr. Speaker, they're driving very big cars, they're owning properties, massive properties of millions of shillings, and that calls for what the President spoke about, the audit of lifestyle, Mr. Speaker, because it doesn't make sense that somebody earning about it will be passed on at a very young age, so that our people grow knowing that employment is not the only panacea to wealth or success, but you can also succeed by simply engaging in businesses. And there are many opportunities, especially coming out of the county functions, the county governments, because they are in the provision for tenders and such like, which is geared towards the youth and the women. With that, Mr. Speaker, I support the amendment into the bill. Thank you.
The Honorable Tongi, I heard you say that when one earns only 50,000, then they should not own property that is it's worth a lot of millions. But I think the correct proposition would be that if you can explain the source of your wealth, then it is well. But if you cannot explain and your only source of income is the employment where you earn relatively a low salary which cannot justify the kind of property that you own, then there should be a question. So the issue would be that we should not deprive Kenyans of enterprise. If you can explain the source of your wealth, then it should be well. What do you think, the Honorable Tongi?
Mr. Speaker, I'm aptly guided, but I was coming from the background, Mr. Speaker, of fact that one has just been employed without engaging himself or herself in another another business other than the income that you are getting in terms of wages. You create some abnormal wealth. But if you are able to, you can justify and explain yourself that, it is the other, moonlighting, for lack of a better word.
Then it is clear.
Then that makes sense, Mr. Speaker. But where there is no another source of income, none, or then there is a query to ask you how that is possible, because wealth is created over years. It's only in Africa, Mr. Speaker, where Fortune 500 is created in a very short span. Elsewhere in the world, wealth is created over generations. It's a family, it's a family tree. But in Africa, you wake up one morning, you hit, that's why our youth are waiting for the jackpot. And no wonder, Mr. Speaker, gambling is becoming a very popular thing in the country, because our youth believe that you can wake up one morning and you become a multi-billionaire. We cannot build a society based on guesswork, Mr. Speaker, where people are waiting for miracles to happen, for wealth to happen. That doesn't happen. It's not sustainable. It's never worked anywhere in the world, and I don't think it's going to work in Kenya as well, Mr. Speaker. So we need to encourage our people to appreciate that it's possible to become a wealthy person, regardless of the income that you're going to earn, but it's a process. It's not a one-off. It's not something that it's not an instant that you wake up and you have that kind of wealth without having to work for it. I can see my chairman is looking at me, agreeing.
Very well, the Honorable Tongi. You have cleverly allowed yourself a second bite at the pie, but it is well. The Honorable Kishimu Githinji, did you want to contribute to this?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would also like to make my contribution in support of the Urban Areas and Cities Amendment Bill. Mr. Speaker, this bill comes at the right time in realignment of the county governments with the new constitution. The county governments have devolved both monies and human resource, and therefore most of the urban areas within the county governments have
livestock area at the border post, among others. Honorable Speaker, the committee recommends the Ministry for East African Community and Northern Corridor projects should intensify sensitization programs about the EAC integration, its aspirations,
its benefits, and the role of ordinary Kenyan citizens and the EAC citizens especially, and to also ensure that all the projects implemented by the EAC institutions within Kenya are well integrated into the local community development priorities. Mr. Speaker, it's good to note that, yes, even in our public functions, we actually nowadays sing even the EAC anthem, but Mr. Speaker, that is not enough. We need to go beyond and sensitize the objectives and, of course, the benefits of integration within the EAC to the Kenyan people so that we embrace it, Mr. Speaker, even as we move forward to greater aspirations as the region. Honorable Speaker, the committee noted challenges impacting the integration process. For instance, different customs management IT systems operated by the partner states frustrate the implementation of the ICT regime. There is also an overabundance of unharmonized laws, policies, and regulations within the partner states that disorganize the implementation of the customs union and common markets. In regard to way bridges, it was noted that way bridges within partner states at times are not standardized and therefore do not give the same weight readings for the same cargo, which frustrate the business community. Mr. Speaker, I am sure this is also very worrying that you can have a container of commodities, Mr. Speaker, in products, weighing differently in Mombasa, having another weight in another way bridge, Mr. Speaker, and this, of course, would harm even the trade itself, because trade is about commodity, it is about quantity, and, Mr. Speaker, we need to standardize our way bridges, and also as we, even as we move towards a unionized custom union. Honorable Speaker, there is need for the minister responsible for EAC to urgently identify the Kenyan laws, policies, and regulations that need to be harmonized with other partner states and share the same with the Committee for Fast-Tracking in order to facilitate cross-border trade within the region. The minister should also liaise with the Council of Ministers to direct partner states to ensure effective interface of different customs IT systems for seamless operations. Honorable Speaker, the committee also urges the Ministry of Immigration to facilitate free movement of persons, particularly for students within partner states. Mr. Speaker, this given that we are moving forward even on having a common and a uniform curriculum, Mr. Speaker, then it is therefore important that we also guarantee free movement of persons, and especially those who are seeking skills and knowledge across the national borders. Honorable Speaker, the committee notes with achievements made by EALA in establishing itself as a strong and effective regional legislature capable of carrying out its legislative, oversight, and representation roles. The matters canvassed during the EALA committee stages and plenary resonate well with the mandate of our own committee, that is regional integration, and have the potential to fast-track the realization of EAC Treaty objectives. Mr. Speaker, I was privileged to be the leader of delegation for the members who went for this very important event. And Mr. Speaker, even as I had some few points on it, because I don't want to take long, whereas I have so many minutes, up to a maximum of 60, Mr. Speaker, I don't intend to take more than extra 8 minutes. And Mr. Speaker, because in our committee, we try as much as we can to benchmark, even by way of reading, with other blocks like the EU, other trade blocks, even like NAFTA, that was done away with by President Trump yesterday. Mr. Speaker, it is good for members to know that one of the objectives of us integrating as a region, and Kenya being one of a giant economic country within the region, of course, Mr. Speaker, is free trade area, And it's good that we understand that the EAC has a population, Mr. Speaker, which is therefore a market of over 150 million population and people, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, even as we move to create a free trade area, it is good for Kenya to be strategic so that we take advantage, Mr. Speaker, of the market that is there for the taking. Mr. Speaker, it is also important to note that another objective of any country or a group of countries integrating is the creation of a customs union, Mr. Speaker. And I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, even as I have enumerated there before, we have encountered some bottlenecks in this, but we are in good speed, Mr. Speaker, moving towards one single customs union as a region. Mr. Speaker, of course, the other one is a creation of a common market, because nowadays, Mr. Speaker, the powers of countries and the power of a country is not measured by the might of its army or defense forces, Mr. Speaker. It is purely a matter of trade. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, ourselves as the EAC, having an integrated bloc, we can be able to negotiate other trade deals with other countries as one entity, Mr. Speaker, and this would go on yielding much more for the individual countries, more than it would yield by each country negotiating on its own. Mr. Speaker, I need to say also that the GDP of EAC combined of these countries surpasses, is a lot of money, Mr. Speaker, in comparative to each country. Because we are moving, Mr. Speaker, to a level of close to 100 plus billion USD as a GDP. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, the point of us negotiating for ourselves as a bloc, as one entity, cannot be gainsaid. But, Mr. Speaker, it is not all complaints, because EAC, we have been able to do so much and achieve so much as a bloc. I have just talked about EALA, which has come out to be a vibrant body on itself and is doing a lot because we interact with these members now and then. Mr. Speaker, it is good to note, Mr. Speaker, that one of the achievements is that now we have a harmonized monetary and fiscal policy. Mr. Speaker, as you note, even the dates of budget reading, Mr. Speaker, and budgetary estimates, it is now harmonized to one, and this is because we are moving forward even to having a monetary union, which is a bloc within the EAC, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are also doing so much in infrastructure. Currently, there is a lot of infrastructural development in terms of transportation and in terms of communication. Mr. Speaker, there are great milestones that we have been able to accomplish as a bloc, and of course, Kenya being one of the countries, we start to gain by those achievements. Mr. Speaker, we have also done a lot of achievements insofar as education is concerned, and skill and labor, because, Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, we have done a lot in terms of integrating the curriculum of the EAC partner states, and, Mr. Speaker, this is a gradual, it is a perpetual exercise, because, as you know, even within our own country, the curriculum keeps changing. And, Mr. Speaker, this brings about the ease when it comes to transfer of labor and transfer of personnel. Because if we have disjointed curriculum, Mr. Speaker, then it would mean, for example, a person who is a Form 4 graduate within Kenya, probably if they have different qualifications to a person who is a Form 4 graduate, for example, from Uganda, Mr. Speaker, this would start as a bottleneck when it comes to labor transfer. Mr. Speaker, of course, we have also some failures as a region and as EAC, even as we endeavor to integrate. And one of it, Mr. Speaker, is industrialization. Because, Mr. Speaker, even as we integrate, this integration would only make sense if integration brings about jobs, if it curtails unemployment. And, Mr. Speaker, there is a lot to be done when it comes to industrialization as a bloc and as a region, because this would actually mean, and it would bring a different meaning and a better meaning to the pockets of the many jobless youth within the region. Mr. Speaker, we have also encountered some failures when it comes to imbalance in imbalance benefits. Mr. Speaker, it is worrying to note that we have tariffs enforced on the Kenyan goods to a tune of over 859 commodities, Mr. Speaker, from goods originating from Kenya to Tanzania. Mr. Speaker, without the reciprocity of Kenya doing the same, Mr. Speaker, of course our traders and manufacturers lose because of these imbalances. Mr. Speaker, we also have a long way to go when it comes to a unified monetary union, because it is the aspiration of the EAC, Mr. Speaker, even to have one common currency, as you have seen also in other blocks. It is also an aspiration of the EAC, Mr. Speaker, to have one central bank, even with a governor. Mr. Speaker, we have a long way to go in this because of some of the issues we encounter originating from some of our partner states, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I go to the finish, broadly speaking, there are many advantages of integrating. But, Mr. Speaker, when we are in such a house like this, which is the Kenyan Parliament, it is important that we talk directly even to our other member states. And, Mr. Speaker, I have to say, without blinking of an eye, that EAC would have done much better were it not for the leapfrogging of some of our partner states. And, Mr. Speaker, I need to mention this, that EAC continues to encounter bottlenecks and roadblocks when it comes to our engagement with our sister state in the name of Tanzania, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just recently, I think within this week, we had our CS for Foreign Affairs enumerating to the Kenyan people the number of Kenyans who are in foreign jails, Mr. Speaker. And it is worrying to note, Mr. Speaker, that the majority of Kenyans who are out there rotting in jails, that Tanzania is only second to China, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the number of Kenyans in foreign jails, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we need to reverse this kind of narrative. We need to start talking about the gains that each country is getting by integrating, other than these hide-and-seek games, Mr. Speaker, that we continue to encounter, especially from Tanzania, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, going through history books, the industrialization of many countries, even huge economies like the US, like the UK, Mr. Speaker, has basis on having a liberal economy. Mr. Speaker, it is retrogressive for any country on earth to continue having protectionist, mercantilist kind of policies, Mr. Speaker, that because, Mr. Speaker, I'm saying this because of Tanzania. When we embrace these kind of things, Mr. Speaker, the only people who start to gain are the people who are the elite, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, even Kenya, anytime we try to invoke protectionism, Mr. Speaker, the consumer starts to lose because competitiveness goes down, Mr. Speaker, and when competitiveness goes down, Mr. Speaker, it means you can be able to buy commodities more expensively in the name of protecting your, the manufacturers and the business people within your nation. Mr. Speaker, we need to speak as the Kenyan people and the leadership, and I'm even challenging our Foreign Affairs Minister and the EAC Minister, that it is time that if we continue to see that the chains that hold EAC towards integration is one country, Mr. Speaker, that belongs to EAC and SADC, we need to make important and tough decisions so that we move forward as a region.
The Honorable Nyoro, yeah. The Honorable Nyoro, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you know that the countries, especially the countries in the East Africa community, in association with our country, these are friendly countries, and we should not be hard to be speaking in regard to them in an adverse or a way that might be interpreted to be negative on the floor of the House without moving a substantive motion in that regard. So you are doing well, but I would like you to just temper your language so that we continue to be friendly with them. Thank you. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I start guided. And Mr. Speaker, just recently, we had one of our daughters from here, Kenya, who was working for Safaricom, who had qualified very well to get a job at Vodacom in one of our partner states. But, Mr. Speaker, this, of course, was declined. These are main issues, Mr. Speaker, because when we talk about integration, we are talking about free movement of labor and free movement of skills, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, I have to say that countries start to gain when we open our borders to expertise. And, Mr. Speaker, because I'm winding up, allow me to give an example of a very important policy that was done by the US back then. That policy was called STEM, which was encouraging immigrants and people of other countries to migrate into the US, especially those who are gifted in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And, Mr. Speaker, Silicon Valley, as we know it now, is a brainchild, it is a child, it is a product of STEM. This, Mr. Speaker, came about because the headquarters of STEM were around San Francisco. And you know, Mr. Speaker, Stanford is just around there. The combination of those immigrant skills, foreign skills, plus, of course, having backup of finance from venture capitalists and other private equity funds within Wall Street, Mr. Speaker, brought about Silicon Valley, the Silicon Valley we know now. Mr. Speaker, I can give so many other examples. Most of the behemoths and big conglomerates, even in the US, were created by foreigners, Mr. Speaker. And I'm talking about free movement of labor. When you talk about a bank like Goldman Sachs, Mr. Speaker, when you talk about even banks that bear and groups that bear American names, like American International Group, known as AIG, Mr. Speaker, these were founded by foreigners, yet they benefit most the American people. Even currently, without going back even to those who were there before, there is our African son called Elon Musk, the founder of Tesla Motors, one of the founders of PayPal, and so many other companies, Mr. Speaker. When you talk about Twitter itself, people like Kalanick were not originally from America, yet these, Mr. Speaker, are currently known as American companies. Mr. Speaker, coming back home, I don't think Safaricom would be the current biggest earner in this nation, giving Kenyan tax, the tax bag and the KRA over 40 million per annum, were it not for the expertise of Michael Joseph. I'm just encouraging, Mr. Speaker, even as we debate this motion, that we need to embrace and challenge our partner states to embrace free movement of skills, Mr. Speaker, and they stop worrying about Kenyans being more qualified. If we go there and run their country better, it is not Kenya that benefits, it is them. If, for example, we have a Ugandan or any other country...
The Honorable General, I like your line of presentation. You are talking about Elon Musk, who is sending the first tourist around the moon.
Yeah, exactly.
That one. And your line of presentation is that there's big benefit in being the bigger brother.
Exactly.
And this is what Kenya is really doing in opening our borders. We should not bother too much sometimes when the people we deal with are mean to us or appear to be mean to us. I think the generosity from us should come from the heart. We should not give so that we expect to receive. We should give with the heart. And I think that is what Kenya is doing, and I think it is a lesson to our brothers whom we are in association with. And we hope that they will learn. And the good Lord never forgets the giver. I'm sure you know that. So proceed. I like your line of presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm actually winding up, and I start guided. I hope you'll be among the first tourists to Mars as being done by Elon Musk. Mr. Speaker, this is my last point, because integration makes sense when we benefit as a nation, and especially when it comes to trade. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to bemoan the current situation. Kenya, as you have rightly put it, has been the big brother of the region. Big brother because, of course, our GDP is much higher, and our abilities and efficiencies are much more streamlined. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to bring a very worrying fact to the members of this House, that even as we continue chest thumping as a nation and taking pride on being a big brother, on being a leader and a giant within the region, Mr. Speaker, this year alone, a country that has never enjoyed surplus when it comes to trading with Kenya has now overtaken Kenya when it comes to our trade. Mr. Speaker, as I speak now, our brothers who we love so much, our neighbors here in Uganda, currently they enjoy a positive balance of trade when it comes to Kenya, Mr. Speaker. And I'm challenging our policymakers that we need to put our act together. There is no way we can have a port that actually handles over 82% of all the commodities that goes into Uganda. And then, Mr. Speaker, we are here being overtaken like people who don't know where they are going. Mr. Speaker, I also challenge this House that we continue making policies that synchronize with the EAC policies so that we can continue enjoying the benefits and the markets of the big block that we are creating in the name of EAC. Mr. Speaker, I want to wind up with that point, and I don't know whether to call the seconder. You know, I'm a new member, Mr. Speaker, but I'll still start guided.
You need to move fast.
Yes.
Yes, then we shall go to that one.
Okay, yeah. I move, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. Very well.
I beg to move.
That is quite in order. Yes, you've done well. Just 1 second. Yes, I'm told there's Honorable Rueda. That is Lamu? Yes, the Honorable Member for Lamu. Seconding, yes.
Secondment is we are going to be Dr. Ochanda, not me.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. The Honorable Chanda, proceed. Your second name?
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Mr. Speaker. You know, in this delegation where my good friend was leading from in front as the leader of the delegation, some of us were whipping from behind. And as you are guiding, Mr. Speaker, it is true that Nyoro is more nationalist than a regionalist, in as much as in the committee of the regional integration. Mr. Speaker, I want to second this by bringing in a few facts that, in my view, are clear. It's been mentioned in terms of sensitization about the regional integration. I think we are very slow in this as a region, not necessarily as a country, but as a region. But while this was happening, as we were visiting or going around in the EALA meetings, I want to state that last 2 or so weeks, I happened to share a platform or a forum with the Speaker of the National Assembly of Uganda and 1 or 2 of the other members of the Ugandan Assembly, together with my neighbor, Raphael Wanjala, in a remote island in the Victoria called Sigulu. One thing impressed me, that in as much as we had all many other issues that we are addressing, one thing that impressed me is the way the Uganda handle the issue of the national or the regional anthem, which apparently we don't do here. In Uganda, in terms of that kind of a function, what they were playing first was their national anthem and proceed to do the regional anthem immediately after that as a procedure. That's one thing that I don't see us do.
And I want to believe that if all countries were doing this, the whole element of sensitization about the regional integration might move a little bit faster. We are talking about people, we are talking about business, and these are the main drivers when it comes to issues of integration. So the more we have our people, particularly along the borders, or our people, our communities that are bordering or in the neighborhoods of other nations, adopting and understanding and agreeing that no, we are a region, I think is going to be much more useful. And it's one thing that I want to say that will help us move forward. In as much as the sensitization exercises are a little bit low, particularly in this country. The other thing that I wanted to mention, Mr. Speaker, is the whole issue of commitment. There are all manner of scenarios in terms of suspicion across members. And there are certain deep-seated, institutionalized kind of attitudes that we have across the East African, different communities in the region. There are thoughts that Tanzanians just have as Tanzanians against others. There are thoughts attitudes that other communities just have against others. And I think these are some of the things that are slowing us down. If we got away with how to address them, we may move a little bit faster. And all these are bringing in issues of fear, bringing in a lot of issues of suspicion, until when you are somewhere, you are very quickly noticed that no, even the way you are walking, the way you are talking, the way you are behaving, you are definitely Kenyan. So I think these are some of the really institutionalized attitudes that we are facing as a country. But that aside, Mr. Speaker, issues of commitment needs to be demonstrated in a much more wider way. It needs to be demonstrated even in terms of how we organizationally look at the East African organization. In terms of commitments, particularly in terms of paying up as members, we've done fairly well. Kenya is really ahead of the others. But then, this is not commensurate with the kind of things that happen in the region. We have a general secretary from a member state, and that member state has never paid anything. And that is the Secretary General of East African integration, of East African region. I think these are some of the things that we really need to look at. There are some of the agencies, Kenya I think is hosting only 1 or 2 of the commissions of the EAC. And yet we are really ahead in terms of our contribution and stuff like that. So the issue of commitment needs to be tied with some of the things that the region does, in my view. The other thing that I want to mention, Mr. Speaker, is how EALA operates. I think there's some little challenge here. You see, in this parliament, in our National Assembly, the biggest source of our agenda is from the executive, from the government. 90% or so of what we do here, the agenda is drawn from the other side, the executive. In a similar manner, for purposes of enhancing regional integration, in my view, EALA needs to be looking at a lot of issues that are generated, for example, from the Council of Ministers and from the Secretariat of EALA. Yet you realize that a lot of what EALA does are more individual bills. Just before we went for recess, we were looking at a report here that almost 2 or 3 bills that were discussed lapsed. And some of these were more critical and were more important, in my view, that would have enhanced some of this that we are talking about. Nindi is talking about this lady from Safaricom. But in one of the bills that lapsed, there are very clear ways of how, if there are issues like that one, there are processes of how those were supposed to be handled. But then that bill lapsed. So it has to be regenerated again, or it just died. So in my view, the Secretariat and the Council of Ministers of the East African region needs to have EALA work as an assembly, the way our assembly works here. And they need to isolate a number of issues that can move forward the integration. There are many. We are talking about legislations. We are talking about laws here that are not harmonized. Some of our laws are completely different from those of Burundi and are completely different from those of other countries. How then do we enhance issue of cooperation? How do we enhance the community? So if, in my view, the Secretariat and the Council of Ministers were to concentrate only on issues that are challenges to integration, then EALA will be more active in terms of what it does than what we are seeing it do today. So, Mr. Speaker, I think these are some of the things that if we looked at, then things are going to be moved. The harmonization process of our legislation, harmonization process of the laws that exist are fairly slow. And it's exactly what's bringing in a lot of conflicts that we have around. Some of the things that we talk about, you wonder why we'll be talking about one-stop border post at the borders in the land, but then we fight at the lake. We fight in the waters. We are harmonizing, we are looking at how to do things properly at the border post, in Isibania, in Namanga, in Busia, in all these kind of places, but we constantly fight at the lake. Why? Why should we have a problem in a place that, in my view, should not even have a border? We should not even have a borderline. But then we are constantly fighting, for example, with Uganda. Yeah, there are all manner of forces, there are all manner of fights, there are all manner of torture issues, we are giving a lot of space for pirates to operate in the lake like I was witnessing in the last 1 week. So, Mr. Speaker, as I second this, I want to believe that there's much more that EALA can do, and I want to believe that much of what EALA can do needs to be generated, needs to be fast-tracked from the Secretariat and our Council of Ministers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
All right. Members, allow me to propose the question that this House note the report of the Select Committee on Regional Integration on the East African Legislative Assembly, EALA, plenary session held on 13th to 16th March 2018 and 17th to 25th April 2018 in Arusha and Dodoma, Tanzania, respectively, laid on the table of the House on Thursday, 14th June 2018. I see interest from the Honorable Kimani Kuria.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker. I raise to support this report by the honorable members. And there are several areas that I think, Mr. Speaker, we should try to overemphasize. The report talks about KRA. And Kenya Revenue Authority talks about the challenges that KRA is experiencing in terms of its delivery on tax collection of Kenyans. And the specific clause, Mr. Speaker, that I think we need to overemphasize to Kenya Revenue Authority. This regional electronic cargo tracking system. Mr. Speaker, we have passed a budget into this House on several occasions on the implementation of this regional electronic cargo tracking system that ensures that cargo is tracked from the time it docks at the port to the time it is delivered to its next destination. But, Mr. Speaker, we continue to lose a lot of tax on this. We continue to have contraband goods that get into the market because this system has not been implemented. And, Mr. Speaker, maybe at a given time we want to ask, what is making Kenya Revenue Authority not to implement this system? Is it that we are happy because this revenue is being lost? We're thinking about all those penalties, Mr. Speaker, that are also being levied by KRA. Right here in center. And this is becoming the cost of operation of business, especially those that are doing imports into this country becoming highly expensive. This report, Mr. Speaker, mentioned about the East African Development Bank. And it's impressive to notice that this bank was given was named as the best performing development bank in Africa in 2015, with a balance sheet of $394 million and an own portfolio of $190 million. But, Mr. Speaker, these member states have underfunded this bank. And when they fund it, the report talks about late submission of their contribution to this bank. But, Mr. Speaker, this is a bank that could revive our cottage industries in Kenya and in East Africa. This is a bank that could support even manufacturing agenda that we're talking about. So, Mr. Speaker, we're saying, if East African community is serious about implementation of its economic agenda for the region, then this is a bank that we really need to think about and invest in. We talked about free mobility of labor across the region. But how are we going to have free mobility of labor across the region when our curriculum in our universities remain unharmonized? Our fee structure, Mr. Speaker, remains unharmonized. So that
Why does it cost so much in one university vis-a-vis in another? And then we expect these professionals that come out of these universities will compete competitively across other university graduates in the area. And we're saying, Mr. Speaker, that we should expedite the amendment of the protocol establishing the intra-university of Eastern Africa curriculum, so that we harmonize both the program and the fee structure and ensure that we have enough and sufficient exchange programs to support this education. Mr. Speaker, I'm also looking at in our engagement, we're talking about the Ujirani Mwema policy, one of the policies of East African community. But how are we going to support this Ujirani only when it is beneficial to our sister countries and not to our own country? And Mr. Speaker, I went ahead and looked at what theories of regional integration are we looking at. Are you using constructivism, or where we are talking about just because we are in the same area, where we have the same interest, therefore we should trade together? Or should we look at only where we have competitive advantage for our country? And not just saying that we are East African community, we must do this business with this among our countries, and not engage in other countries. Mr. Speaker, I would wish that as Kenya seeks for her true state in the East African Assembly, East African community, we look at ensuring that we only engage where we have both competitive advantage, and we should also stop looking at regionalism and look at globalization more than we look at regionalism. Because, Mr. Speaker, I cannot overemphasize the example of this Safaricom director that was denied employment in Tanzania, even though they were qualified for that particular position. So we are quick to open our borders. But when are we going to harmonize our tax laws? Because we sit down as a country, we pass our VAT, we pass our excess duties, that makes it expensive to operate in Kenya more than the other countries. And what do our sister countries do? They don't amend their tax laws. And some of these big companies are now finding it cheaper to incorporate and operate business in, say, Tanzania or Uganda, and export their products and services into Kenya. Even when we're sitting on this table, Mr. Speaker, to talk about the East African community, to market it as a regional bloc, for both a market for our goods and services to as a market for labor, we should make sure that our country is not disadvantaged. And with that, I support this report, Mr. Speaker.
Very good contribution. But members, as we deal with this and look at the region and the global market, we must reckon with this artificial intelligence phenomenon that is now also called the Internet of Things, which is really the future of things. So if you are going to have your physical borders, and you are saying that you will not pass here, and yet the artificial intelligence is there, we have to reckon with it. What are we going to do? We as a nation, we as leaders in this country, we as East Africans, as Africans even, what are we going to? What is our place in the world with the advent of artificial intelligence? I'm sure the Honorable Chanda, you have given some thought to this, even as our neighbors and the ones that we want to coalesce with and become partners in this East African platform. These are problems we have. But there are bigger global problems with artificial intelligence, which are taking up jobs for even a lot of the managers, a lot of jobs that we think are secure will not be secure, will not be there tomorrow. So we need to think about this as Africans, as Kenyans, as East Africans, and as leaders. These are the challenges that we have. The Honorable Ongeri, the Honorable Ongera, not Ongera, sorry.
Thank you.
The Honorable Ongera.
It's Ongera, Mr. Speaker, and
Ongera.
thank you for giving me this opportunity. And there's a big difference between Ongera and Ongera.
Yes, I know. please accept my apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand guided. Mr. Speaker, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I rise to support this motion. Let me from the onset congratulate the mover and the seconder of this motion. Mr. Speaker, being a member of this committee, I want first of all to congratulate the mover for tabling this report. There are certainly key issues that arise from this report that, Mr. Speaker, begs me to think that the dream of integrating or in bringing integration within the EAC is really a fact. Mr. Speaker, there are issues that are really of great concern. In order for us, if we are to fully integrate and have a harmonized system, for example, a taxation harmonized system, for example, a system of free trade, free movement of persons, Mr. Speaker, we need to have political goodwill of the partner states. One area that concerns me greatly, Mr. Speaker, is the question of having a common foreign policy within the partner states. The second area, Mr. Speaker, that greatly concerns me is the area, Mr. Speaker, of not having a proper awareness amongst the citizenry. When we visited in all these countries, when we went to EALA, Mr. Speaker, and the border post that we shall be presenting, we found, Mr. Speaker, that our citizens are not really aware on what the integration process is all about and how far we have reached in it. Mr. Speaker, unless you have your citizens working in partner with you, integration cannot become a reality. The other area that concerns me greatly, Mr. Speaker, is that Kenya has borne the brunt of meeting the expenditures of these partner states. Many of these partner states are not meeting their financial obligations. And Mr. Speaker, as a result of this, EALA, for example, as a parliament, is not properly funded. It keeps worrying me, Mr. Speaker, that we can have very good conferences discussing about regional integration or integrating within the EAC, and yet our partner states speak good lip service in the conference rooms, but behind the tables, Mr. Speaker, they pull the rugs. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, these are some of the concerns that come to my mind. The last one, Mr. Speaker, is the concern that the one-stop border program, Mr. Speaker, had very tremendous achievements. But, Mr. Speaker, it cannot succeed successfully unless we commit ourselves to having necessary infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, one of these I have in mind is firefighting equipment, proper ambulances, storage and quarantine areas, testing of laboratories. Mr. Speaker, we found that these services were wanting. They are not properly catered for. Lastly, there is need for us to have a harmonized immigration laws so that we are all speaking from one language. Mr. Speaker, with these few remarks, I beg to support.
Very well. The Honorable Ongera. We shall have the Honorable Barire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too rise to support this report. And let me say that I'm extremely educated this afternoon, especially having listened to the mover, the seconder, and having also listened to the other members of that committee who seem to really understand what is going on, and how I wish that the entire House would appreciate these issues like I have heard the members of this committee do. And the first thing that just crossed my mind is how many members of parliament today really understand what is this integration all about. How many even know how much has been achieved and what challenges we are facing. And so I really hope that at some point through this committee we can even have our representatives of EALA coming, in a special Kamkunji to really share with the House the challenges that the country is facing within this integration. You know, Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity of being the Assistant Minister for Tourism for 5 years. And I remember for 5 years, we were very, very, very clear that there was need to have a uni visa for tourists who are coming into East Africa. And the whole idea was to make sure that, once a tourist lands at Jomo Kenyatta, they are able to move around Kenya, cross over to Tanzania, and really have a common marketing strategy for East Africa as a tourist destination. But I must say that the biggest challenge we got is, that one member state just felt that it was not in their interest. They thought that there was a hidden card by the Kenyan players, and therefore they made it totally frustrating, to the point that, you'd go to meetings and the ministers are meeting, and the minister for that country just doesn't show up. And so we never moved. I'm happy eventually in this current parliament, President Uhuru and other presidents who felt that this visa issue is of interest to them went ahead and moved on without this other member state. And I can feel the frustration that is there when, certain members don't see things the same way. And therefore the need to harmonize policies, to harmonize whatever it is that needs to be harmonized, laws, so that everybody is speaking from the same on the same wavelength. And I must say that, we had such challenges that at one point, one of our biggest challenges was actually the boundary between Serengeti and Masai Mara. When tourists would leave Masai Mara and they are going into Serengeti, each van was asked to pay $100 to enter into Serengeti from Masai Mara. But when they are moving from Serengeti and coming into Masai Mara, they didn't pay. So I am also concerned about this big brother thing that we believe in as Kenya, that we are the big brother in this important community called East African community, and we are always having to be the ones, to be the humble ones, and in the process we are losing in a big way. I think even as we get into this partnership, even as we engage in this community, there's need that our interests as a nation are taken care of before anything else. A time has come where the competition, the economic competition across countries, across regions, across the globe is becoming extremely aggressive, that we cannot afford to give up certain things that will make us stay in a disadvantaged position. And so I really want to say that I am extremely impressed by the work of this committee. I feel that the Regional Integration Committee is doing a great job, except that the rest of the nation needs to know. And I'm happy you have actually said that there's little awareness on what is going on. So
ile yanayopatikana upande wa usalama, kwa sababu vile tunashirikiana biashara na tunafaidi. Nataka kuhakikishia hii chemba kwamba sisi kwa Kenya, kwa ule ukarimu wetu, kama vile ulivyosema Bwana Spika, wewe ukiwa mkarimu sio lazima utarajie mwingine akulipe. Na kwa hilo Mwenyezi Mungu anatubariki, na nawahakikishia kwamba kweli kama Kenya tunafaidi kwa hilo. Na nina hakika majirani zetu watakuja kuona, hawako mbali kuja kuona kwamba sisi tunafaidi na wao watafungua njia. Kwa sababu ile mwanzo ningependa kumpongeza Rais ile kutoa nafasi majirani kuja bila kutumia passport, kutumia tu ID, kitambulisho. Hiyo imetufungulia biashara vizuri Kenya, na wameanza kuhisi na wao karibu, hawako mbali, watakuja kuona. Au wakiendelea kukaa mbali, sisi tutaendelea kufaidi. Bwana Spika, sina mengi zaidi isipokuwa hayo. Tunahakikishia Kenya sio kwamba hatuko tukiwa wazuri hatufaidi, tunafaidi. Tumeuliza, mimi pia niko kwa hii committee, na tumeuliza maswali na tumehakikishiwa kwamba tunafaidi, hatuendi hasara. Asante.
Very well. The Honorable who look for order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to start by thanking the leader of the delegation, Honorable Nyoro. I must say that also I am adequately now educated on what East African integration is all about and the challenges that we are facing as a country. Mr. Speaker, if you are perceived to be a big brother in a union like ours, the East African community, it always comes with a lot of challenges. We are perceived to be very aggressive. We are also perceived to be, our aggression is perceived to be geared towards taking over the entire region, which is not a bad thing. But it puts us at a disadvantage because as we open up our borders, as we allow our brothers and sisters from other member states to take up jobs without subjecting them to unnecessary hurdles, our own citizens are denied the same